You won't hear me, my behind the scenes comment. Let's just take a moment and pause in a brief moment of silence and gather our thoughts for the day. Thank you. I'd like to call the State Budget Committee to order. There is an agenda that has been distributed. Any additions or corrections to the agenda at this time? If not, the agenda will be laid on the table. The first thing we have is the April 2021 minutes. Any additions or corrections to the April 2021 minutes? Been moved by Representative Porter, second by Senator Melton to accept the minutes. Any further discussion? All those committee members in favor of the April 2021 minutes say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Minutes are carried. We are going to follow the agenda, I guess. We have quite a list today, and we will try to work as appropriately as possible through these and to go forward. So without any further ado, I have the Adjutant General. I have Colonel Steve Himes. Is he here? Sure. And it's this microphone that is working.
I'm on? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Again, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Scott Collins. I have the honor of serving as the Chief of Staff and Director of State Operations for the Adjutant General's Office. Our leader, the Adjutant General, is currently in Slovakia, working on your state military partnership with that country. And so I'm here today to give a brief description of the capital project request and pass the baton to our subject matter experts. Today we have Colonel Steve Hines, and he is the Construction and Facilities Management Officer for the Indiana National Guard, and Mr. Jim Mahern, Director of State Facilities for the Adjutant General's Office. As a recap of the information that we have previously provided, our request today concentrates on the Danville Readiness Center. The center is 65 years old and in poor condition. In an effort to update the administrative space, supply room space, arms vault, kitchen space, toilets, showers, physical fitness space, locker room space, and modernize the latrines to serve our female soldiers, we are presenting this project for your approval. The project will add 5,000 square feet to the facility and renovate 13,000 square feet of current space. The total project has a cost of $3,800,000 with the federal share of 60% at $2,280,000 and the state share, our request today, for $1,520,000. I'm glad to yield the floor at this time to our subject matter experts, and they will provide details and answer your specific questions. Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here and represent Brigadier General Lyles, the Adjutant General, and the 12,000 Guardsmen across the state, of which about 850 are still serving various sorted missions fighting COVID, be it vaccination sites, test sites, et cetera. And then a couple hundred soldiers on the border, and then a couple hundred soldiers overseas as well. Is there any questions about our request to support the Danville project? Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions at all, members of the committee? Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Next, we have Department of Revenue, Mr. Vance.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ed Vance. I'm the CFO with the Department of Revenue, and I'm joined by Kevin Gully, who is our CIO and project manager for Project Next Door, which is our integrated tax system modernization project. Kevin and I want to thank you for this opportunity to make our fifth and final request for the funding of this project. This is for our fiscal year 2022 appropriation of $20.3 million. This will go towards funding rollout 4 of our project. Rollout 4 consists of 17 smaller tax types, including things like cigarettes, alcohol, motor fuel, special fuel, peer-to-peer, ride share, and again, a number of other taxes. And this particular rollout comprises about 10 to 12% of the revenue that the department collects on an annual basis. So we're very excited about this final rollout. Currently, we are in the midst of rollout 3. And this particular rollout has 14 tax types, and it's anchored by the major tax type individual. And it's going extremely well. It's on budget and on schedule. And, things have gone extremely well with the project to date. The last time we were before you, we were successful in launching Rollout 2. We talked about that at that time. Rollout 2 was launched last Labor Day, and it was, again, on budget and on schedule. And, we're very excited about the benefits that have accrued from that particular rollout. It consisted of 13 tax types and was anchored by the major tax types of sales and withholding. So to date, the project, we have actually spent about $61 million of our appropriation. We have been appropriated $95 million to date. And of that $61 million that we've spent, and we've been funded $74.7 million incidentally, but of the $61 million that we've spent, almost 2/3 of that have gone to pay directly our vendor partner in this, our implementation vendor partner, FAST. And they've been an exceptional partner for us, and the project has just done fabulously well under their direction. Between now and Labor Day, we do anticipate spending another $7 million on the project, and that will be to complete Rollout 3. And of that $7 million, we expect $5.6 million of that to go to our implementation vendor partner, FAST, to conclude Rollout 3. And so with that, I will turn it over to Kevin, who will give you a little bit further overview of the project.
My name is Kevin Gully. I'm the CIO at the Department of Revenue. I appreciate the opportunity to walk through Project Next Door. We've talked before. I'll give a little background here and setup as it relates to what the project is. It started in September of 2018. It's a 47-month project. It is in 4 rollouts. Rollout 1 was our corporate-related taxes. Rollout 2 was our business taxes, sales and withholding, food and beverage, et cetera. Rollout 3 is our individual taxes, and it includes wagering taxes and fiduciary. And then rollout 4, as Ed referenced, is our special taxes, cigarette, OTP, other tobacco products, et cetera. Really, what we're doing is we are replacing or modernizing our tax administration environments and transforming our business processes. Really, there's 2 key brands that will come out of the project. One is called ITS, the Indiana Tax System, and it is our tax administration system. The second component is called InTime. It is our customer portal. It allows our customers to interact with us better, whether they file, pay, et cetera, through this portal. What it also, the tax administration replacement system does, it includes all of our core processing functions, return processing, payment processing, audit-related functionality, customer service, et cetera. So it is a full integrated system. What are our accomplishments to date? As Ed referenced, Rollout 1 was successful. It came in Labor Day of 2019. It was our corporate taxes. Some of the key benefits we've already started to realize: electronic filing of some of our corporate returns, all of that has trended up. Also, the ability to file electronically amended corporate returns, which used to be paper. This is good for us because it improves our data quality, our speed to process, and good for our customers. They want to interact with us from an electronic standpoint as well. But we also introduced the customer portal InTime to this customer segment, the corporate taxpayers, for the first time, and it really allowed them to interact with us directly. Rollout 2 went live last Labor Day of 2020. It was the business-related taxes, sales and withholding. Some of the benefits we've seen from that: obviously we can file and pay online through the portal. We can also file and pay through the portal for our amended returns, which once again used to be paper and a slow process. But we also added functionality through that portal where they can view correspondence, see notices that we send to them, and really interact with us in a more effective way. So where are we now? We're in Rollout 3. The target for that is this Labor Day. Once again, it's the individual taxes. 2 of the biggest benefits we'll probably realize out of this rollout include: number 1, the ability to file electronically for the fiduciary taxes. Those have always been paper. Number 2, providing this portal for the first time to individuals so they can interact with us, secure message with us, but also see their notices and correspondence with us as well. So what's next? Rollout 4, as Ed referenced, and that's why we're here today. It is the special taxes. It includes those alcohol, OTP, and cigarette taxes, and we're also bundling in that the new e-liquid or vape tax that just got passed. It seemed like a natural for us to add that into this special tax rollout, Rollout 4, that is targeted for the end of month July of 2022. So we're rolling that in, and that's when that will be effective. With that, are there any questions?
Questions? Thank you. Anything further, sir? Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to Mr. Matthew Kent, Department of Administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Kent, Department of Administration. The Department of Administration is requesting its annual appropriation for capital R&R payments of previously bonded facilities that are now managed by the Indiana Finance Authority. These R&R payments were originally part of the bond when these facilities were bonded, and now those facilities the bonds have been defeased. We continue to make the R&R payments that were originally portion of the bond to keep these facilities maintained at the level they were when they were bonded. This is an annual appropriation, so I come before you folks every year to make this request. The facilities are listed on your agenda. We do have a couple new ones, so just real briefly, Wabash Correctional Facility, Newcastle Correctional Facility, Logan Sports State Hospital, Evansville State Hospital, and Madison State Hospital have all come on to this program since last year. Like I said, annual appropriation, so come for you guys every year, but if there's any questions on the process, I'd be glad to discuss those.
Questions? Thank you very much. Next is Indiana Archives and Records Administration, Mr. Lightly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chandler Leidy. I'm the Executive Director of the Archives and Records Administration. Matt Kitt's up here because he acts as the agency's CFO. I'm before you because the Department of Administration, on behalf of my agency, is requesting funding to begin design and programming work for the new Indiana State Archives building. In 2001, the State Archives moved from the basement of the State Library to a warehouse on East 30th Street. So that was 20 years ago, and this move was intended to be a temporary one. The location did not have all the building needs for long-term preservation of Indiana state government's documentary heritage. That includes the state constitutions, governor's papers, and the acts of the Indiana General Assembly. Designing a new facility with archival preservation and accessibility as the end goal will help the Archives and Records Administration fulfill our mission, serve Hoosier citizens and constituents not only today, but in the decades and century to come, and leave a legacy for the men and women who appropriate this money for this building. These funds will go towards designing a new archives building as well as site acquisition if necessary. If there's any questions I can handle or Matt can handle, we welcome them.
Any questions? As you go through this design, will you make an evaluation what records just need to be warehoused versus what records are explored and evaluated?
Yeah, we kind of already go through that process between what we store at the Record Center, which everything at the Record Center has a shelf life and meets its final end at some point. So the archives facility is just going to focus on the documents of permanent value to the state.
Permanent value?
Yes.
Okay. Senator Brown, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. So are you going to, first of all, do we own or lease the warehouse? And are you going to maintain that facility if there are going to be a continual flow of documents that aren't going to be permanently archived?
Is this one on? Okay. Yeah, we currently own that warehouse. We'll continue maintaining that. Some of the records will actually stay out there. Some of the larger volume records that aren't, I don't want to say important, but that we just have to keep for 10, 15 years will stay out there. The archives that we're talking about here will be for more of the long-term things that we're really wanting to hold on to as the state to protect those in a place where they should be protected. But the warehouse we're currently using will maintain under state control.
Okay, so, and I'm going to have this question then for other design types of, so you're anticipating $5 million possible site acquisition. I assume it's not going to need to be as large as the warehouse you have now, but I'm curious, do you kind of ballpark what you anticipate the building to cost, and that's why you put in, is this a percentage of what you anticipate the building to cost, the $5 million?
I'd hate to really narrow it down and say yes on that. We did actually design one a couple of years ago when we had some of the bicentennial funds, so we kind of have an idea, and we've already got a lot of the design built. We know what the programming needs to be for the new building. So design on this one should actually be less than what it traditionally would be. We put in a larger number because we don't know where the site's going to be, and just to kind of safeguard it so that if we do come in and a site is identified that's going to be more than what we thought, that we'll have the flexibility to get that without having to come back to Budget Committee. Now, the $5 million, if we don't spend that, if we end up using a state site, or it comes in a lot less, any of the remaining money will just roll into the construction part of the project.
And I'm going to assume that where the warehouse is now, it's not a possible site location?
Not currently, no.
All right, thanks.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. He answered my question earlier. I was just wondering where the site was going to be.
We don't currently know.
You don't currently know.
We're exploring options.
Okay, so you're exploring 3 or 4 options right now. Is it in the downtown area or?
I'd hate to say where it's going to be. We're going to try and keep it somewhat centrally located, though, I'll tell you that.
Oh, okay.
We don't know, though.
I understand. I understand in regards to real estate. Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we go to the Indiana School for the Blind Visually Impaired. Mr. Kent or Mr. Brown?
Can I stay here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Come on up, Carl. Again, Matt Kent with Department of Administration. I brought my expert on this, Carl Brown, up here as well. He's the Deputy Director of Public Works at Department of Administration. The Department of Administration, on behalf of the School for the Blind and Visually Impaired and the School for the Deaf, is requesting $13 million to initiate the co-location of the two schools to a single campus. This co-location is based on the parameters that were established by the task force, which was established by House Enrolled Act 1443 in the 2019 legislative session. The funds we are requesting at $13 million are going to go towards several different areas. So I'm going to give a high-level view of what those areas are, and then if there's any questions, we can kind of dig in on each one of those. The first thing we want to do is we want to give an extended evaluation of the programming at both schools. We want to understand what is needed at each school. We also need to understand that these are two completely separate populations we're dealing with, and some of these services that we're going to try and combine might end up needing to be separated out. So we want to get a thorough understanding of what each school does and what each school needs. We'll also be looking at the programming kind of how things move on the campus. So everything from classroom life to the dorms to how students, parents, visitors arrive on the campus and move around the campus. So all these things need to be thought about when we're designing this campus. Second, these funds are going to go towards site selection and acquisition. And we're going to stay as closely as possible to the parameters that were set for us by the task force, which is basically a 10-mile radius outside of 465. We'll probably also be bringing on a real estate consultant to kind of make sure we've evaluated every option that we have available to us, since we are trying to stay within that 10-mile radius, and we're looking for 120 plus acres of land, so contiguous land within that radius. Last of all, these funds are going to go towards some of the actual renderings, design work, architectural engineering, and then if the site needs any utility work or any utility design work, we'll bring that into there as well. Before we take questions, I do want to kind of make a quick note here that even though Department of Administration is going to be heading up this project and managing it, we're going to be working hand in hand with both schools to make sure that the interests of those schools are protected every step of the way. I'm sure there's questions.
Mr. Brown, any comment? Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Mr. Kent knows, and you know, Mr. Brown knows also, this is very close to me in regards to my position, in regards to this co-location of these two said schools. So, Mr. Kent, you have no idea where this may be, the schools may be co-located. Is that correct?
Correct.
But you're going to hire a real estate investment company or who a real estate company to help you find locations, right?
Yeah, within IDOA, we've got a real estate team, and they're available to search kind of what's available out there. We think by hiring possibly a real estate consultant, they might be able to have a little bit better idea of not just what's available, but what could be coming available, or some sort of, they can dig a little deeper. They might know the market a little better than we do.
Okay, but thank you, Mr. Chairman, if I may, thank you. So in regards to this, the subcommittee that met pre-pandemic, and I don't think they, to my knowledge, publicly met since then, are they going to be involved in this process anymore, or has that been force-fed and moved on?
The task force, basically when they made their recommendation, that was the end of the task force.
Okay, so any other stakeholders that are going to be involved? So anyone from the two communities and their culture that they both have, are they going to be involved in this process?
As I said, we'll involve the schools in it, and I think it's going to be up to the schools to see kind of who they want to involve in this. I've worked with both schools, and Carl has as well, and we know the populations of those schools, and they're very passionate about their facilities and what the missions of those schools are, and so we'll be sure that the schools are involving those people as we involve the schools.
Thank you. And so, in the involvement with those schools, is there, other than the bill that was passed, Any members of the General Assembly are going to be involved in this process?
Not to my knowledge, other than when we bring things before Budget Committee.
So you're going to have your way and want us to ratify it?
I'm sure we can give you guys some updates.
One more last question. Comment now. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the update that we've had thus far. It's just from my perspective, again, something that happened pre-pandemic, haven't heard anything, and now we're coming back forward to, quote unquote, look for something. There's no difference to you, Mr. Kent or Mr. Brown, but I'm just very concerned about the true inclusion and transparency of this potential project of these two cultures that will at some time be, from my perspective, forced to live together on 120 acres of land, which and now I'm trying to figure out where that will lie within this real estate market, 120 continuous acres. So I'm very concerned about that, and I hope as we continue, if I'm still around, to address this, that we continue to have some type of meaningful dialogue and discussions with people that are really involved with this from the two cultures, and even with members of the General Assembly, not just coming to rubber stamp something from the administration. And with that, I'll yield the rest of my time to someone else. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cordora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kent, thank you for this quick question. What is the anticipated future plan for the current piece of land and the current campus once in the future both campuses are combined and built on a new different location?
I think it's far enough out. We've got a long enough lead time that we haven't considered what those plans are going to be. The timeline for this project is pretty long, and we've got a lot of upfront work to do before we even talk about what we're going to do with those campuses once.
Great. My final comment, this actually, the current location is in my district, Senate District 30, and I've received tens of inquiries from my community about the future of the campus and how that land is going to be used. So going back at the comment of Representative Porter, I think it's critical to engage those who represent the constituents who will be impacted by this. So I would urge you to keep me posted as long, with many other members of the General Assembly, because we have that legal, moral, and professional obligation to keep our constituents informed. So I would really appreciate you keeping me in the loop on the developments of this project.
Understood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. So I want to build on the comments before me, which I am glad all of those questions were asked. I think they're important questions. And to add, so the blind school, the school for the visually impaired and blind is in my district. Can you remind me how many acres that is?
Carl?
I believe it's around 63, 64.
Okay, I thought that was, I was going to say 60 something. This is, an appreciated use in the community, but as we move forward, folks in neighborhoods all around will realize that there is an opportunity here with this public asset to do something that's also appreciated by the community. And we want to make sure that there's a voice of the legislature, of the communities, when we talk about disposition of these properties, and that the highest public good is the outcome of that disposition, and not the highest bidder. Not that that would be the case, but I just want to say that out loud, because I think it's really important that we have those conversations. And then I'd like your response, but I'll throw in one more question here before I yield. And it's just not clear yet, and maybe you said it and I missed it, but the timeline when those properties would be vacated to then be disposed of.
It's hard to say, a timeline. We've kind of built out some timelines, but right now they're so vague that it's hard to give, a definition on when we think all this is going to happen. Because one, you've got to get all the new campus basically up and running before you can even think about moving anybody in. You can't move them. You're not going to be moving people over in phases. The design on this, the programming on this is going to be probably 9 months to a year alone. That's just on the programming part, and then we've got to design the actual campus, what it's going to look like. I hate to put dates out because then people are going to come back and say, you said, I would look at probably, I'd say 3 to 4 years before we start going down that road on where or what we're doing with those. And even that's just purely a best guess right now.
Okay.
Because
And then can-
just getting the money now, things
Okay.
start setting in motion.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. And can you just comment a little bit more on that disposition process?
On how we would
Yeah, and
move
how-
them, move the campus over, or?
No, I'm sorry, so that state property that, I'm
Yeah.
speaking specifically to the blind school, but
Yep.
there's, I'm sure, interest in both properties, and engagement with the community and how that property would be used moving forward.
Yeah, we get that direction. Department administration doesn't really make that decision. A lot of times we'll work with the governor's office and kind of some of the ideas they've got, and then work with agencies to see, if those agencies, if any other state agencies might have a use for the property. This is a unique situation, though, and it's so far off that I would hate to speculate on what the conversations are going to be once they happen. But I'm sure that the representatives from senators from that area will be involved in that conversation.
Okay, thank you. And I would strongly encourage that, as well as some form of community engagement. I mean, I think ideally, these are really particularly special properties, both of them, very, very important to the communities, high value for a lot of reasons, not just monetary. And, ideally, we would have a visioning process with the communities. But I'll leave it at that. I'll be staying closely in touch with this project.
As you
Thank you.
should. And I think the benefit we've got here is we've got a long runway on this. We're going to be in this design process for a long time, so we can talk about ideas and vet them out as this other process is going on. So.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe I'll come visit you in the office one of these days.
Anytime.
Thanks.
Senator Mishler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. By no means am I a land acquisition expert in Marion County, but it just seems like 120 contiguous acres in that area would be pretty difficult to find. My first thing. Second thing, it seems like 120 acres is a little excessive. So I guess my question would be, how stuck are you on the 120 acre number, and how determined are you to be within that radius if you can't find anything?
I think, to your point, the 120 acres is very difficult to find. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're talking about bringing on a real estate consultant that might have better ideas on how to come up with that than what we've got. And to your other point on the 120 acres is we basically laid out one of our designers that we were working with during the task force basically laid out what buildings are going to be needed, where they would go, and how the campus would flow. So we have a very preliminary idea of it, of how the campus will lay out, and the 120 acres was basically the minimum they said we needed. Now, if we get into it and we don't need that, I think that changes things a little bit, but we need to figure that out, I think, before we would obviously acquire a site. But the 120 acres is basically what the minimum we're shooting for right now.
Well, I'm going to agree with these folks. I think that the legislature needs to have some say in that, or just at least be informed of the direction you're looking to go.
Agreed.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was the chair of the task force, so I just, first of all, want to correct, we're not forcing these two schools to live together. We're not forcing the residents or the staff. This was a 2-year process and a lot of community engagement. It was a very well thought out representation from the community, from alums of the schools, current staff, et cetera. So I think that's really important, that this isn't something the state is requiring or making them do. This is a decision that was unanimously and mutually agreed upon by both of the schools and all the participants of the very large task force, which was open, public meetings, and there has been nothing since, because our task was finished last fall. That was what the legislator charged the task force with. So there have been no meetings and no further discussion, because now it's been passed on to the IDOA. But, and I think along those lines, it was made very clear in all the discussions that there are no current plans for where their existing facilities, and that there is no reason to have a current plan for the existing facilities before we find new facilities and build them and move them. In other words, it's been clear, because of the money allocated, we do not need to have a benefit from that, but I would suggest, from someone who was on the task force but doesn't live in Marion County, that that is a state asset, and I certainly appreciate the Marion County residents being concerned about these assets because it most directly affects them, but it affects all of us. It affects all of us because it's a state asset, but it also affects all of us because these two schools do not only serve Marion County children. And so I guess I would caution you, I would echo Senator Mishler's. The task force did not obviously discuss programming. We were looking at the infrastructure of the current facilities and what possibly could be needed, and gave some parameters, which are only recommendations. But the original design consultant that was hired sort of put a map in place that was aspirational. And I think that's where the 120 acres is coming from. And so I would caution that that was not a decision from the task force. And we made that very clear that that was not part of our recommendation, which why it was not listed anywhere. So I appreciate you have to start somewhere, but I also think now that you're asking for 13 million to look at programming as well, this is when the deep dive really should be made on what they need. And we've talked about those things in the task force. For example, one of the schools currently has an auditorium, and those sorts of things are important but expensive. And are there other opportunities in this area that would be willing, that's just an example, to share those spaces without having for them to build and/or acquire the space for their own. So I just want to kind of echo Senator Mishler's and sort of put a little bit of not the brakes, but slowing down on this. I think we need to have, before we jump and find a real estate specialist, I think we need to have a better understanding, because the drawings that we had and what we were left with were not task force recommendations. That was just sort of giving us a roadmap of what could possibly happen. And we did, most importantly, ensure the two schools, their current students and their alumni, that the cultures would be intact and the programming for the different, and that was what was most important in terms of moving these two schools together, co-locating, but not merging them. So that's just sort of something I think we all need to keep in mind.
Understood.
Thank you. I think I'd like to reinforce what Senator Brown said. As a member of the task force also, programming is important. And so I think as you look, you ought to maybe have that extra option outside of Marion County, because you could probably pick up more land area and then put the money into programming as opposed to spend all the money within, a limit of 10 miles of 465. So continue to think outside the box on this issue. Representative Porter, did you have another question?
Yeah, I did, but I think you hit on it. I think Senator Mishler also hit on it. I do disagree with other individuals that are on the task force. I'm concerned because if you go north in Hamilton County, with the 10-mile radius, land is very expensive up north versus Shelby County or Johnson County. And I'm just very concerned about the cost of the land if one decides to go outside of Marion County. And I understand it's a state assets, but I represent that school for a long time now and been involved. So I also understand that culture probably as well as anyone else in here. So I'm just concerned about those dollars that we're going to spend potentially. And I know there was concern about the facilities ongoing maintenance on that. I know that was part of the argument. So I just let that be transparent, be truthful, and forthright, and I do understand that. But I also want to know how many. I can't remember how many acres are at the deaf school.
It's over 80.
It's over 80, so 80 and 63, right?
Yeah, I think there's about 147.
147 acres total between the two campuses.
Yes, sir.
And in the deaf school is right north of the state fairgrounds, and we the state fairgrounds, sitting as an advisory member to that state fairgrounds, use a lot of that for parking and for when the fairs are open for that 3-week run or
Yes, sir,
so.
the southeastern part of the
Right.
field there, the football field area.
Yeah,
Yes.
right, okay, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Brown, Mr. Kent.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you very much. Next, we go to item number 6, the Law Enforcement Academy. Mr. Horty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful to be here before you and represent the 17,000 full-time, part-time, and reserve police officers that serve in our Indiana communities. I serve as the director of the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy, and my name is Timothy Horty, and I've been there for approximately 2 years. The majority of our officers are trained at the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy in Plainfield. It's the only residential academy in the state, and we are here to humbly request $7 million in funding to initiate the design, engineering, and the programming phase of this facility. The original building was constructed in 1975, and the initial expenses are to start a campus renovation and move us towards a more modern adult type of learning environment where the students are more hands-on and away from the classroom and a pen and pencil kind of examination. House Bill 1006, which I'm sure you know your colleague, Mr. Representative Steuerwald, authored, has given us a great opportunity that we think can make a difference and stamp our legacy on law enforcement training for the next couple of decades. We have visited other campuses around the country to determine what some of the best practices might be. We've been to Oregon, we've been to Kentucky and Tennessee, all of which are similarly situated in our model of learning. We're working closely with our friends from the Department of Administration. Mr. Kent and Mr. Renner have been very helpful in guiding us through this project. Again, we want to thank the kind consideration of the committee for this $7 million request, and I'll invite any and all of you out to, I know some of you have been to our academy to look at the facility, and you're more than welcome anytime. That's all I have, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Kent, do you want to say anything?
No, I think you covered it.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Next is Department of Corrections, Indianapolis Reentry. I have Mr. Kent, or is Mr.
Yeah, Kevin asked me to do this one, so.
Okay, Mr. Kent.
This will be the last project I've got today, thankfully. So the Department of Administration on behalf of DOC is requesting $2.5 million for the demolition of the Indianapolis Reentry Educational Facility. This was last used for offenders in 2016, and since that time, Department of Correction has wound it down where there's just a few employees there just to maintain the buildings and kind of keep the lights and the heat on. The Department of Corrections no longer needs the facility, and so with that, they're turning it over to the Department of Administration to oversee the demolition of this facility. So the property itself is 14 buildings on 15.5 acres. It's on the east side of Indianapolis. The requested funds are going to go towards hazardous material abatement, demolition of the buildings themselves, removal of the debris, and then grading of the grounds once completed. Once demolished, IDOA will maintain control of the property until we determine further use for it.
Questions? Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kent, in regards to the tearing down of demolition, do we have somebody already on staff to do that, or you be bidding that out?
We'll be bidding that out.
And, okay, and so you go with the most responsive bid and with MBEWE participation?
Lowest and responsive bid.
And how long, Mr. Chairman, and you, because that's maybe right on the edge of my district, right across the street. So with that 15 acres, you're just going to sit and maintain it for a while until you figure out a developer to come through and...
We're not a developer, it's state-owned.
Okay, you're going to sell that property? Is that the intent?
I can't speak to that right now.
Thank you, Mr. Kent.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, Department of Corrections, Mr. Orm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The first of the projects that I'm bringing to you this afternoon for funding is $1.23 million for the replacement of doors and frames, security doors and frames at the Putnamville Correctional Facility. The facility is located in Putnam County, houses 1,910 medium security offenders in open dorm settings. The housing units were built between 1988 and 1993. This project replaces about 130 high security doors and frames that have cycled in the life of this prison thousands of times a day as people enter and exit the housing units. It's just time in the life cycle of that facility to replace the doors.
Questions? Next.
Thank you, sir. The Heritage Trails Correctional Facility is located at the former site of the Indiana Boys School in Hendricks County. It houses just under 900 low-security offenders. The dining facility was built in the 1970s. This is a simple tuck point masonry repair project. The only thing of particular interest, it's one of the few buildings in the Indiana Department of Correction accented by Indiana limestone, and this will correct all the problems with the Indiana limestone in the building for another 50 years.
Thank you. Any questions? Number next.
My last project, sir, is the reconstruction of the Westville Correctional Facility, $12 million for engineering services. The facility is located in LaPorte County, houses 2,800 offenders of various security levels. Of particular note, the facility was opened in 1945 as a state psychiatric facility, transferred to the Indiana Department of Correction in 1977. It has 117 acres inside the secure facility, or the secure perimeter. The facility is of an age, design, and construction that it has degraded to the point that it is marginally maintainable. The utility costs at this facility are extreme. The conditions of confinement do not meet the modern correctional model, nor does the delivery of programming. The facility is difficult to secure. The housing units are long, linear housing units that provide many, many spots that cause security concern. This project is for engineering services that will lead to reconstruction on the same site as reconstruction of the prison on the same site with facilities that are modern in design and allow us to provide modern programming and efficient programming to the taxpayers.
Questions? Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're going to build the new facility on the same 117 acres?
Reconstruct, ma'am, yes. We actually have a large buffer zone around that prison. We have plenty of real estate. We've modeled this for a decade, and we have plenty of real estate right there. With the rebuilt facility will encompass areas of the existing facility. We'll go back and do environmental remediation and clear the site, and there's plenty of real estate there for what we need, ma'am.
Okay, so you mentioned, thank you, you'd mentioned 2,800. Our notes say 3,700 offenders, but what are you going to build for? What's the?
That will be determined during the design phase, what the needs of the long-term needs of the department are, funding, what the cost of that funding is. That will be determined during this engineering and design phase.
Well, is it going to be more than 3,700 or less than 2,800?
It will be at least the existing. There will be the potential to increase that, and we'll give options for the increase of that. When we come back in front of the committee, I'm sure there will be discussions on that before we come back.
All right, thank you.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions. First question is that what buildings are you going to reconstruct, rehab on the facility?
They'll mostly be reconstructed. A lot of them will be demolition. We'll build new, demolish old. We will retain some of the high security, the highest, in particular the high security unit located on the northeast corner of the facility is a pretty state-of-the-art unit, even for being 20 years old. It will absolutely stay. Our high security unit we call WCC will absolutely stay. There's a number of things in my mind on that campus that logically need to stay, but I'm afraid to comment on that too far because I think it needs to make financial and operational sense to the designers when we start laying this out. Just because I look at it and think it might have a reuse, I don't know that it will. But for certain, the high security unit will stay. Mostly the housing units, the administration areas, and all the programming, school treatment areas will be rebuilt.
And one more. And this design and construct will happen in 1 year?
Oh, absolutely not, sir. No.
Okay, so that means dollars will be, which will be allocated, be going from 2022 to 2023?
Yes, sir.
So that means there'll be some dollars that we have to use in 2023.
I don't, once this committee approves the funding, the timeline of that is not something that we have to worry about. The moment that the funding.
It does not revert, right?
It does not.
So it's 400 million, right?
That's the estimated tag, yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So you won't spend, okay, so it's gonna roll over until, so you're doing a phase, I'm sorry, you're doing a phase in?
Yes, sir.
A phase.
This is just for the design.
Design.
We'll be back to see you for the construction. This is just the design.
The design and construction is in the 400 million, correct?
That's the estimated, sir. In a time where you're paying $9 for an 8-foot 2x4, I think we have to go through to the design to see where that comes out.
Okay, but we did appropriate 400 million.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Further questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Number next is Indiana State Police, Major Williams.
Good afternoon, Chairman, and to the rest of the committee. I'm here on behalf of the Superintendent Carter, and I won't take much of your time. This will be a continuation of the requests and the designs and studies for needs for our laboratory and combined post facilities. We are currently about 90 days out from completing the Fort Wayne construction site. Right now, that project is, considering all things considered, coronavirus, et cetera, is still within budget. We're still within a reasonable schedule to get that completed on time, and we're ready to move into the low, or referred to as District 13 construction process. The funds that have been requested is just to get that process off and running, and then, of course, eventually at some point address the Evansville concerns as well as that can be. Of course, we will continue to evaluate and redesign our existing posts at Fort Wayne as well as Lowell. We will address, which will help us address some other issues, i.e. long-term storage, which we will turn those facilities into and reuse the garage component as well too. Any questions for me?
Questions? Thank you very much.
I have the lieutenant here as my subject matter expert on Fort Wayne, if you guys need it, but he was also my backup, so if you guys, so I guess I'm free.
Thank you very much, and thank you for what you do. Next is the State Fair Commission. Ms. Hoy, it doesn't look like Mr. Allison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ray Allison. I'm the Vice President of Development for the Indiana State Fair Commission. Cindy's a little under the weather today, so she regrets not being able to be here today, but she thought out of the abundance of caution it was best that she not come. I'm here requesting the release of the $50 million appropriation for the construction of the Fall Creek Pavilion at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. As we've been before this committee before and discussed, this new multi-use building will replace the existing swine barn on our campus. The original swine barn was built in 1923 as a single-use livestock facility. It is an open-air facility, about 147,000 square feet. It has a myriad of issues currently that make it unsafe and unable to continue in its current use. The structural steel is failing, concrete is spalling, it is not ADA accessible, it's impractical to load and unload livestock because the current building was built into a hill. So there's a 10-foot elevation change from the north end of the building to the south end of the building. So just a number of issues that make this building unusable moving forward. A feasibility study that we did a few years back said that its expected life was maybe 10 years if we did nothing. The new building will be a 197,000 square foot multi-use facility. We will be maintaining the historic north facade of the current structure. All of that has already been approved by historic preservation through DNR. And then we will be raising the shell of the building and building a new multi-use building in its space. We will also be doing some underwater underground, stormwater work at that portion of our campus. We have significant issues there that need to be addressed. And then we will also do some work around our Gate 6 entrance on Fall Creek Parkway and the parking lots surrounding this new facility while we're in there doing construction and digging in the ground. This multi-use building will serve a number of purposes, including the continuation of our swine shows during the state fair. One of the opportunities that we identified through this process is indoor track and field. And those efforts have already started to bear fruit as we were awarded the 2025 NCAA Division II Indoor Track and Field Championships to be held in this building after it is finished. So we respectfully ask for the release of these funds today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Senator Mishler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So can we finally say this is no longer a swine barn?
We can.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. It will continue to house swine during the Indiana State Fair, but it is no longer a swine barn.
Further questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next is Richmond State Hospital, Mr. Babb. Or
Afternoon, thank you. We're asking for additional funding to decommission the steam plant at Richmond State Hospital. During design phase, we come to find out we're about $1.6 million short on the funding needed. We won't be able to decommission it completely, but we will be able to satisfy to go down to low pressure steam, be able to save money on staffing, utilities, and eliminate a lot of the underground issues we're having. Questions?
any questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next is Indiana Department of Transportation, Mr. McAvoy.
Afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The Indiana Department of Transportation formally requests funding in the amount of $2,213,508 to address various repair and rehabilitation projects across our 6 districts. This bundled request of 35 individual projects was determined by our annual facility assessment process and will include roof replacements, HVAC replacements, concrete wall repair, secondary containment construction, fence and gate installations, oil water separator installations, building reskin projects, some brine making system installations, and some vehicle lift replacements. Completion of these projects will either improve our operations and efficiency or will extend the life of the facility.
Questions? Thank you. Number next, Department of Transportation. Go ahead.
So we would also formally request additional funding in the amount of $1,206,570 for the construction of the Waterloo Unit Building and the Salt Building. The construction of these 2 buildings was previously approved at the September 2020 Budget Committee meeting for a combined amount of $4,725,000. The Waterloo Unit project was bid in April of 2021, and we received 1 bid in the amount of $4,206,570. The Waterloo Salt Building was bid in May of 2021, and we received 1 bid in the amount of $1,725,000. The combined cost for both buildings is $5,931,570. This is a 25% increase in construction costs over our original budget amount. The cost overruns are due to significant construction material increases.
Questions? Senator Brown.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is that 25% cost overrun something we're going to, I mean, maybe Mr. Kent can answer this, but that we're going to see across the board, or is it just because of the unique materials that your facilities need?
We're experiencing it across the board right now, so as we enter the next phase of our projects in the biennium, we're anticipating some of this. I'm sure IDOA is experiencing a lot of these same issues. There's really, there has been no downturn in it yet. So in some instances, it's 30% we're seeing in some material. Steel is very bad, wood also, so it's a struggle.
Thank you.
Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it unusual to only receive kind of one bid when you're doing a project like this? And then also, is it, I think maybe once or twice a year, Budget Committee sees a unit building or a salt building. Is it typically the same construction company that's bidding on these projects over and over again?
So to answer your first question, it is unusual to see one bid. We expected more on the unit building. You know, we had contacted at least 3 other companies that have bid on our projects in the past. They showed no interest. So what was your last question? So our contractors are typically regional based, right? So in the Fort Wayne area, we're going to see people from that general area. Sometimes you get some from Indianapolis to come up that far, but it's rare. So.
Any further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is the Department of Natural Resources, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, committee. DNR is requesting funding to begin the conceptual and design process for a new state park inn. DNR currently has 7 inns/lodges within its inventory. Only one is north of Indianapolis, located at Pokagon State Park in Steuben County. The new inn will be located in the northwest quadrant of the state, in all likelihood at Potato Creek State Park near South Bend in St. Joseph County. This location has been discussed numerous times over the last 20 years, with feasibility and market studies being completed over time. We anticipate that the inn would have 100+ rooms, adequate meeting and banquet space, and an indoor aquatic center. Just as a reminder, the 7 current inns are Fort Harrison State Park Inn, located here in Indianapolis, McCormick's Creek, which is Canyon Inn in Spencer, Owen County, Turkey Run, West Central Indiana, Spring Mill in Mitchell, which is just south of Bedford, Brown County in Nashville, Clifty Falls in Madison, and Pokagon, which I mentioned, in Steuben County, northeast Indiana.
Questions? Okay, next.
I'm here also to present 7 deferred maintenance projects. Before I proceed with the deferred maintenance items on today's agenda, I would like to update you on what we call round 1 of deferred maintenance projects. Joining me here today are individuals from IDOA. You've all seen Matt Kent and Carl Brown. They're leaders of IDOA and great partners. I also have 2 individuals from DNR. I've got our lead engineer, Dale Gick, and my asset manager and capital projects manager, Greg Sorrells, here with me today. And like I mentioned, this has been a great partnership between IDOA and DNR from the beginning and will continue to be in the future. Many of you recall that in September of 2019, Matt Kent and I came before this committee and received approval to proceed with round 1 of deferred maintenance projects in the amount of just under $30 million. I believe I've supplied you with 2 maps highlighting our efforts. The first map highlights the completed projects by DNR property in the amount of approximately $13 million. Among the over 50 projects that have been completed, I want to single out a few. We completely renovated 54 rooms at the Abe Martin Lodge at Brown County, which was a great accomplishment. We have also replaced close to 40 restrooms with ADA accessible facilities, and as you can imagine, this has been greatly appreciated. I have also shared a map indicating the properties and projects that are in process, representing almost $16 million. As you can expect, the pandemic had an effect on this effort. There were several weeks of complete shutdown to where we are now, waiting on materials to be delivered. Remaining on this are a few wastewater, water line, and lift station projects. These are often very time-consuming and expensive as well. And let me also say, if you want to visit a property, we can certainly arrange that. And if you have any specific questions on any of these projects, please feel free to reach out to me and I will facilitate a response. Before I jump to the round 2 request, I would like to ask Matt Kent to come up here and join me to give you a very brief minority business participation on status on this project.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. As we requested these funds the first time around, we did promise that we would come back and give a report on not only the expenditures, but also on the MWBE on these projects. So you guys, the committee released $29.6 million. As of recently, we've got $13 million already expensed, so that's already out the door. And then we've got another $8 million that's on either purchase order or requisition, so that's in line to be spent. So we've got $21 million basically being pushed out or already out the door. On the expenses and the purchase orders, the MBE is at $1.8 million or 9.8%. The WBE is at $377,000 or 2%, and the VBE is at $98,000 or 0.5%. So IDOA has been working with our Division of Supplier Diversity to make sure we're proactive on getting these out there and doing everything we can to make sure to keep these percentages not only where they're at, but to keep trying to get them higher. Any questions on that?
Thank you, Matt.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. I just want to, first of all, thank you for you're one of many requests that we asked for statistics, and you're the only one that's come back and given us the statistics that we asked for. They may not be where they are, but at least we do know what is going on. And I hear to your statement that we're going to do better and continue to work forward to that. So I want to thank you for the report, and we want to thank you for coming back and letting us know where we are, even though it's 1.8. 9.8, 2%, and 0.5. At least we know where we are, and in other places we don't know where we are or where we need to go. And I really appreciate that of you being more transparent and adhering to what a member of the legislative branch of government asked for. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thanks, Matt. Let me proceed with our round 2 line items. I believe your packet also included a map of round 2 projects. That's the one that has all the colors on it. There are 7 categories of projects which I will briefly present. Restroom and toilet rehab in the amount of $10 million. We would like to continue the replacement effort to include over 70 or more restrooms and comfort station facilities over 27 properties. A total of 14 comfort stations will be installed, and these are restrooms with shower stalls, and a total of 60 vault toilets will be replaced as well. Number 2 is playground renovation and rehabilitation in the amount of $5 million. This allocation will allow us to improve 40 playgrounds to ADA capacity on 37 separate properties to include 3 forestry properties. DNR's goal is to have a minimum of 1 ADA accessible playground on every property. And that will allow us to maintain that goal. I believe it's number 3, trail rehab, $4.5 million. This allocation will allow us to make necessary repairs, replacement, and or rehabilitate numerous trails on 20 different properties. This will include bike trail resurfacing, horse trail stone surfacing, and bridge and boardwalk repairs. I believe it's number 5, in rehabilitation, $10 million. These funds will assist in HVAC repairs, guest room renovations, and other rehab projects across DNR's 7 inns inventory. We anticipate that Spring Mill Inn in Mitchell, Indiana, will be the initial focus. Number 6, a very general rehab line item for $10 million. These funds will assist in roof repair, window replacement, target range repair, dock replacement, fish hatchery repairs, building rehab, and HVAC replacement across 25 properties. Dam rehabilitation. These funds will go towards repairing erosion damage, structural integrity, capacity levels, and other necessary repairs covering 14 locations across the state. These locations include 3 state forest properties, 3 fish and wildlife properties, with the remaining being on state park properties. And the last is underground tank removal remediation. This project will complete the final phase of removal, remediation, and above-ground tank installation of the remaining 19 underground storage tanks across 13 DNR properties. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Mishler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, can you refresh our memory on how much revenue these parks bring in to the state?
That's a good question. About $27 million per year pre-COVID.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mike, for the presentation. I want to just tell you how much I appreciate these investments. This visual of these maps are really helpful. The work of the Department of Natural Resources is beloved by so many Hoosiers, and it's great to see this investment into the future for the agency. And thank you for the saplings.
You're very welcome.
I had a wonderful time this year. I don't know if any of my colleagues did as well, giving saplings to constituents, and it's a really fun and rewarding project every year. Finally, there was in the recently passed budget, there was a line item that I haven't had a chance to ask anyone about yet. It's $25 million, a new designation for
Land acquisition,
yes,
conservation land acquisition.
Yeah, what does that mean? What is that going to look like? Do you know?
Well, we are at the table discussing that very issue. We're seeing if possibly we could fill that very similar to other land acquisition projects that we've had, in the last previous years. We've got a Healthy Rivers initiative that we've done since the Daniels administration. We had the Bicentennial Nature Trust that we did under the Daniels administration. We also have the Benjamin Harrison Trust program. So we're trying to look at those 3 to see if we could kind of mold into something similar so that we just don't reinvent something, but it's still a discussion item.
Okay, all right. I'll look forward to hearing about that in the future. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Representative Porter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to call you Dr. Smith because you have done so much for us here in DNR. But I want to thank you again. As Representative Hamilton said, I've done this sampling for about 7-8 years, and it's the biggest thing at the farmers market in which we go to. We give them out there. And thank you for those numbers and adhering to our request to see where we are in regards to that, because we do spend a lot of money, and our dollars are not just for one segment of the population. I thank you for that. I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to address Senator Mishler's question again because there's a little bit more to that. I mentioned $27 million annually. That's on the inside of the business. On the state park revenue side of the business, we are currently at $40 million through May. The previous record was 33.6. So we're having one heck of a fiscal year in state park revenue.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any further questions? Representative Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering, I'm having a lot of people having trouble finding RV spaces in campgrounds, and they say this takes 6 months for the state parks, they're full, and I just wonder if you had any idea about expansion of rental places in state parks.
Well, that's always on the agenda. What we would like to do, we'd like to improve what we currently have and bring it up to par prior to building anything new, but that's currently always worth a consideration. Yep.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next, we'll go to the federal economic stimulus items, State Board of Accounts, Ms. Leatherman.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kendra Leatherman. I'm the Deputy General Counsel at the State Board of Accounts. We're here to discuss requesting funding to contract with CPA firms to perform audits on Indiana's local units of government. As you know, a lot of the local units have been receiving increased federal funding through the CARES Act and ARPA. Just in this last year, traditionally we would do 240 federal audits, and for the coming year we'll have 340 of those. And this funding will fill the gap for us for the next fiscal year. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Senator Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation today. Just a quick question. With the amount of federal spending that's coming, how long do the communities have to spend the dollars as allocated?
They have until December 31st, 2026.
So
let me clarify.
Yeah.
They have until December 31st, 2026. They have to basically have those funds obligated by December 31st, 2024.
So each year is going to require a significant amount of auditing across the state?
Right. So every year we'll have to do a reassessment of how many federal audits there are to do. And then, therefore, we anticipate there will be a funding gap at least for the next 3 or 4 years, potentially 5 or 6. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
When you're subject to a single federal audit, when the local unit expends more than $750,000 in federal financial assistance a year.
Right.
So it's based on when they spend the money, not when they receive it. That's what triggers the audit requirement.
I guess you partially answered it. I guess the question and concern that I have is that if we're going to continue to audit per year and you're asking for $6 million just for this year, wouldn't you need more moving forward?
Yes, we anticipate this will be an ongoing request.
Okay. So is it the idea to kind of come back before a state budget committee to make their request annually, or?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what is the projected amount that you guys estimated, I guess, over the lifespan of the funding that's allocated to the municipalities?
If it remains consistent, the way it is now, it would be approximately $6 million a year until they're done spending the money. Because it's based on how many units spend over that threshold, I can't really tell you what it can be for next year until they turn in all their financial information after December 31st of this year. But it would not be unreasonable to be anywhere between 30 to 42 million.
Right. Regardless, you still don't have the capacity as a department to do it annually. I'm just curious.
Right. So there is such a large increase that even if we had, let's say, 50 more staff, and that's not exactly a made-up number either. So we still would have to contract with outside firms to get it all done because they're in a deadline. So you have 9 months from the end of somebody's fiscal year to complete the audit because they're all due at the same time. The federal government's given some grace to that deadline, but because they're all due during the same time, even if we had sufficiently more staff, we would still have to contract some of it out. To your question about staffing, we do anticipate, over the next year, 18 months, we'll be hiring more staff, and so hopefully next year the request won't be as much as it is this year, but it's all dependent on how much money the local units spend.
And this is probably more of a comment, and then I'll close, Mr. Chair. I would think that if you have the full budget amount that you know that you might need over the next few years, if there is room within the federal dollars that we have, if we can kind of put that to the side and whatever is not spent will revert back to that line item. So I would just suggest probably sharing what that full amount is, so we probably wouldn't have to revisit this annually and just empower you all just to do the work that's needed to be done every year. So that's just my thoughts on it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Ms. Ledbetter, I need a point of clarification. The CARES Act is 2021, correct? And you said
Yes.
2024. That's the rescue dollars, 2024.
Correct.
But you said, okay, I just want to make sure, because I heard you say 2026, you said 2024. So it's 2021, these dollars have to be spent by those government, right?
Right. So CARES Act funds have to be, Chris, I'm going to look really bad if you obligated by December 31st, 2021. But the audit requirement, regardless of whether it's CARES money or federal money, is still the same dollar threshold. And so since we know the local units are getting such an influx in funds, we know this problem will not be over by the time that we're done auditing the CARES Act, because once the CARES Act auditing is over, then rescue plan funds, or state and local recovery funds more specifically for local units, will be kind of the next influx of dollars to come. Does that help?
Yep, it does. Thank you very much.
Senator Bryan.
Thank you very much. I assume, so this money, we have federal money to do the audits of these state and local municipalities, the audits of the money they've received, right? This isn't out of our state budget money.
Correct.
Right. So, and going forward, that may vary because the federal government, can change the rules and requirements as it goes forward. But are any of the local units of government required to participate financially in this auditing process?
So currently, under statute, a local unit of government is required to pay $175 a day for what we call the financial portion of their audit. And they are required to pay what we call the full and indirect cost rate for the federal portion of their audit. And so when you calculate what we call our cost recovery, how many hours we anticipate we'll do on the financial piece versus how many hours we'll work on the federal piece, what we can bill them, that difference between what we're going to incur from the CPA firms and what we can actually charge the local units is that $6 million. So yes, they do pay for a portion of it, but currently the way their audits are funded via statute, the state general fund generally makes up the difference of what it cost us to do it versus what they pay.
So did they also receive federal funds to help them pay for their portion of the audit?
Yes, they can use their federal dollars to pay for their federal portion of their audit.
And are you seeing an increase in per hour fees from CPA firms since this bonus of millions of dollars of auditing is out there in the marketplace?
We have not yet. I will say, because we are the designated external auditors for state and local government, at the moment, the CPA firms are just happy to get the business because they don't normally do what we call GASB audits.
Right.
So I would not say that they're necessarily, coming at us for any money, but they're, at some point in time, that could be a concern, but I don't see it as a concern right now. They gave us fairly decent rates.
And do we have any problems collecting the portion of the fee, since I imagine we're the ones who put it out from the locals to pay for their share?
Yeah, under statute, what happens is we send a bill to the county auditor, and then that the portion of what they pay for their audit bill is taken from their property taxes at settlement time. So in general, we don't have a problem with them paying because they see the bill and we get the money. There are some instances with smaller units or when we bill for like small little utilities that doesn't come necessarily from their property tax revenue, that we do have to enter into, payment agreements with them. But no, generally the taxing units, we don't have a problem.
Their fees, local fees should not come out of property taxes when they have federal dollars to spend for this.
Well, the statute says that their audit bill comes from their property tax revenue. They are allowed to use their federal program money if they so choose. But it is my understanding that most of them just stick with the property tax collection portion.
That could be a little disconcerting. So the local units could ding the property tax owners to pay for audits of the federal monies that are coming in, and they don't pay for it, but the monies that are coming in actually had money set aside to pay for their share of the federal audit. Obviously, it's in the code, so you
Yeah, I
can't fix
mean,
it,
it's
but
kind
that's
of
a
the way
little
the
disconcerting
statute's
to me.
set up right now. So I would say from our perspective, you know, as long as we're getting paid what we're supposed to, it is
right.
Okay. I mean, if the legislature wants to make some changes on how the collection process should go, then, you know, we're certainly happy to, you know, discuss what that might look like.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Kendra, I actually don't have a question for you. I just wanted to kind of clarify something for the committee. House Enrolled Act 1123, among other things, requires that before an agency can, or before the state can proceed with using any of the new federal dollars, basically any federal stimulus dollar where there is discretion requires the state to come before a budget committee to get those projects reviewed if the dollars weren't contracted, obligated, or spent by April 29th. And so, you know, I think Kendra's request is a fairly simple one. Budget agency has one. There's a few others on here that are a little bit more complex, but that's, again, just, you know, normally we do not bring federal grant requests or anything like that to budget committee, but just to remind the group of why all these agencies are here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding us. Any further questions? Thank you. State Budget Agency, Lisa.
Thank you, Chairman Brown, members of the committee. I'm Lisa Ackelbert, Deputy Budget Director, one of the Deputy Budget Directors, and I am here to request $65,000 from the Coronavirus Relief Fund to assist the Budget Agency with doing subrecipient monitoring. Subrecipient monitoring is a requirement of the Coronavirus Relief Fund received by the Budget Agency. The Budget Agency is the prime recipient. Therefore, we have the responsibility to do the subrecipient monitoring of our subrecipients.
Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Department of Education, Dr. Jenner, Mr. Murphy.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Brown and members of the State Budget Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present today and for allowing us to share our plan for the ESSER 2 and Gear 2 discretionary dollars. Before getting started, I would like to introduce a few team members on our DOE team who are here to answer specific questions, if helpful, to the committee. With us today, we have Brian Murphy, our DOE Chief of Staff and State Board of Ed Executive Director, Jason Callahan, Assistant Secretary of Pathways and Opportunities, Dr. Charity Flores, our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. John Keller, our Chief Information Officer, and, well, two more. Tracy Brown, our Chief Financial Officer, and Ron Sandlin, Senior Director of School Performance and Transformation, and he can answer some specific questions about some of the federal specifics that we have. We have had quite a year in K-12 education. The 2021 school year was filled with challenges, yet while many across our country have struggled under the weight of the pandemic, in Indiana, in many ways, we have risen above. While most states were challenged to open in person, our schools worked hard to ensure a safe environment that kept many students in the classroom. Self-reported school data shows that the majority of Indiana schools were open in person almost the whole year. And a huge thank you to our educators for working with health partners to make this happen. Likewise, when many states said they would struggle to administer federally required assessments, our schools produced completion numbers that rival any other year, specifically a 97% completion in both I Read and I Learn in both the areas of ELA and math. This data will be critical to understanding student learning as we begin to turn the page from the pandemic. While some also struggled to determine how strategic accelerated learning might look, our Indiana schools are showing that when communities come together for students, incredible work can happen. Also an important partner in these efforts, a bipartisan majority of the Indiana legislature, who just this session created the Student Learning Recovery Grant Program, providing $150 million to support school and community partnerships. And we say thank you very, very much for that support. It is making an impact as we speak. As of today, $120 million has been awarded to support some of our state's most at-risk students in English language arts, mathematics, college career readiness, and this includes 110 community partnerships with over 350 unique partners representing over 90% of Indiana counties. These partnerships, again, are focused on our most at-risk students, and we continue to work with schools to measure success and best evaluate and elevate our best practices. And finally, while some states struggle to maintain needed school funding, again, thanks to you in this room, our schools are working to find bold and innovative ways to deploy historic education funds over the next 2 years. To provide a quick level set, in a typical non-pandemic year, federal K-12 spending in Indiana totals over $550 million. Since March 2020, in addition to the federal funding we would normally expect, we have also received an additional more than $3 billion. As you likely know, the majority of dollars, 90%, or $2.7 billion, goes directly to our schools. The prescriptive federal formula provides the local funding amounts, and schools determine their funding based on their unique needs. In order to maximize the return on investment for Indiana schools and students, our team at IDOE has been working with school leaders and teams to target the dollars towards accelerated learning, sustainable innovations, supporting educators, and updating infrastructure. Additionally, over the last 5 months, we have spent a great deal of time listening to our K-12 partners, our educators, and our other critical K-12 stakeholders across the state. Again, this includes teachers, principals, superintendents, charter school educators, non-public school educators, school counselors and other staff, higher education, business industry, government leaders, philanthropy leaders, civil rights organizations, stakeholders representing the interests of at-risk children, and of course, our students and their families. As we have listened, we have also taken time to ask questions. In particular, we wanted to learn more about the impactful work that is currently being done in our schools, as well as opportunities for improvement, so that we might better understand our collective opportunity to positively impact Indiana students going forward. Both the listening and the data have shown similar themes. First, we must focus on student learning and outcomes, which includes improving student outcomes in critical areas such as literacy and math, as well as helping schools and communities strengthen, expand, and create more seamless K-12 pathways and linkages to enrollment and employment, particularly for our racially and ethnically diverse students and those in poverty, of which our Indiana data shows significant learning gaps even prior to COVID-19. Secondly, we must also focus on the educator talent, quality, and value, which includes elevating the mission and value of Indiana's K-12 educators, as well as continuously improving guidance, support, and accessible data for those recruiting, educating, and mentoring rising educators. And finally, We must focus on system alignment and capacity building, which includes streamlining and removing barriers for our schools, allowing and encouraging local innovation and partnership, as well as assisting local educators in solution finding for real-time issues. We have a lot of opportunity ahead, and where our data shows the challenges, it also provides great opportunity. Like in most states, students in Indiana experience learning gaps at varying rates depending on their socioeconomic status and/or race and ethnicity. We see this in urban, suburban, and rural areas in Indiana, and cities and counties around our state. And this is true prior to the pandemic, so follow me on this data for a minute. 2019 iLearn data showed a statewide ELA proficiency rate of 48%. When we look at this data for Black, Hispanic, special education, and low-income students, these at-risk student groups on average are performing at least 12% below our statewide average in ELA. Our 2019 iLearn data also showed a statewide mathematics proficiency rate of 48%. When we look at this data for Black, Hispanic, special education, and low-income students, these at-risk groups on average are performing at least 14% below our state average in math. Our 2021 statewide iLearn data will be released next month, but preliminary data is already showing a drop in both ELA and math scores, with math seeing a more significant decline. As announced early this spring, our partnership with the National Center for Assessment will be critical to understanding where students are today and providing conclusions and recommendations to help understand and close student achievement gaps. We know this will be some of the most challenging and complicated work that we face as educators. And yet, as we have shared this information with external partners nearly every day, our Indiana educators stand ready, have their sleeves rolled up, and are keenly focused on the work ahead. As I mentioned earlier, we have several members of our IDOE team here today to help answer more specific questions, but I would first like to provide a high-level overview of how we plan to strategically invest these federal dollars as we maintain our focus on our North Star, which is our Indiana students. The priorities you're about to hear reflect our commitment to creating an education and talent development continuum that affords each and every student with the quality and purposeful educational opportunities they need to create lifelong success. And on that note, Brian, if you could pass out our document. With this approximately $84 million in ESSER II funding, we plan to focus on 6 key initiatives. Dedicating approximately $20 million to support the implementation plan for the science of reading in STEM, $25 million to support a newly created regional pathway innovation fund, $2 million to support the GWC CTE Summer Bridge Program, $7 million to support the implementation of Indiana Employability Skills Standards, $25 million to support data systems modernization, $5 million to support the creation of strategic planning consortia. Let's start with the implementation plan for the science of reading in STEM. In response to the iLearn data I discussed earlier, we will work with local schools to increase focus on key areas, particularly reading and STEM. This includes creating a structure to implement and ultimately execute a plan that we can continuously grow over the next several years. Let's first talk reading. We know that literacy matters. When it comes to the fundamentals, data shows that the roadmap of opportunity is endless for students who can read by the end of 3rd grade. The future looks very different for 3rd graders who struggle or who are unable to read. While our Read 3 data from the 2021 assessment is not final yet, I can tell you we will see a drop, and it looks to be like a significant drop in our state's literacy passage rate. According to research from Yale University, students who are poor readers in the 3rd grade are likely to remain poor readers in high school. They are less likely to graduate high school on time or may never receive a high school diploma. That's compounded for our state's most at-risk students. The implications of being illiterate continue to have an impact as literacy affects the educational attainment potential students have for the rest of their lives, impacting their future quality of life, health, living wage, employment, and sustained earning power. So we absolutely, as an education team, will be leaning in to make sure all Indiana students can read. We also know that science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM, help to develop employability skills and prepare students to be creative, critical thinkers, and problem solvers. This means that even if a student does not pursue a career in STEM, the knowledge and skills they develop through STEM education will benefit them anywhere they go. Through STEM, educators are helping students develop the foundational skills of inquiry that will prepare students to tackle our state's and our nation's biggest challenges of tomorrow. To seize these opportunities, the Science of Reading and STEM Implementation Plan will identify specific schools for support, maintaining a focus on our most at-risk students. Similar to a model used in a couple of other states, we will invite these schools to partner with us. And upon partnering, these schools will be paired with dedicated instructional coaches, adding an additional layer of support as we work to ensure students have the building blocks for continued success. Next, we'll discuss the Regional Pathway Innovation Fund. This competitive grant program will incentivize and support local communities to establish meaningful K-12 pathways, to continue blurring the lines between K-12, higher education, and workforce in order to best maximize lifelong success for Hoosier students. And part of our discovery and in listening to stakeholders, we are seeing some communities across Indiana that have developed strong partnerships locally between K-12, higher education, and employers. In these communities where that local synergy is activated, we are seeing students graduate high school with a diploma in hand, as well as, for example, a post-secondary credential and/or a high-value industry certification. Some schools are even leaning in on how they might improve access to quality work-based learning experiences in their community. We've observed repeatedly when communities are working together, outcomes improve and students win. In the same breath, other communities are just beginning to plant some of these seeds, and they have requested additional support on how they might lean in and make sure all students can make these critical connections, regardless if they plan to enroll, employ, or enlist. Here's some quick illustrative data. Data shows that 79% of Hoosier High School graduates say they plan to immediately begin some form of higher learning right after graduation. And you've probably heard Commissioner Leber say this. This is 2019 data, class of 2019 data. By the following year, only 59% of that cohort actually continues any sort of training or education beyond high school. And only 25% of a graduating Indiana high school cohort completes a credential in 4 years. 33% complete a credential in 6 years. These numbers highlight additional opportunities for improvement when we begin to disaggregate the data by student demographics. Our pathway efforts are continuously improving in Indiana, and we see these locally driven partnerships forming in our communities across our state as a major asset. While 64% of Hoosier students leave with dual credit, dual enrollment, AP, with a little more improvement and intentionality, we can sure help a lot of students in our state. Park County is one of several examples we could point to. So let's dig into their local data. While Park County has a 24% attainment rate, 34% if you include credentials, through the work of Park Heritage High School, 30% of students are leaving high school having completed the Indiana College Core. This is a 10-course or 1-year general education college level that transfers seamlessly to all Indiana public colleges and universities. And Indiana law actually says that it has to. So thank you for that several years ago. It's helping a lot of kids. And that 30% doesn't even include CTE certifications and credentials, which will further increase that percentage. By promoting cross-sectional collaboration between K-12 higher education, local community organizations, and workforce leaders, Indiana can continue to improve our state's K-12 education system, prioritizing knowledge, skills, and competencies beyond the classroom and providing a meaningful pathway towards post-secondary success for every student. Along these lines, we'll also focus our near-term recovery efforts by providing financial support to the GWC CTE Summer Bridge program, which helps students complete the last mile toward completing dual credits, industry certification exams, and work-based learning experiences that were impacted due to COVID-19. As we help these students to become college and career ready, we must also think long-term about how we prepare students for the workforce. We'll work to increase exposure to employability skills at a young age. Specifically, we'll focus on supporting educators to help students in grades 4 through 8 engage with the Indiana employability skills standards critical to success in today's competitive workforce. This work will prioritize elevating successful programs throughout the state and building an infrastructure to better support skill development. We also plan to focus on data systems modernization to better identify and address learning needs in real time. Currently, a lot of our data in the K-12 space is manually reported by schools, which takes them a lot of time to complete and submit. The vast majority of the data is not in real time, so there's a significant lag in our state's data. And there's also a very natural human error element when there's manual reporting. Our goal ahead is to automate the collection of data from source systems at the school level and build out a universal data management system within DOE that allows the state to run analyses and reports quickly and efficiently. This data can then inform not only our decisions at the department with an emphasis on improving student outcomes and success, but will also be a resource for legislators as they contemplate important fiscal and other policy decisions. These systems will also help students and their families to understand and track their progress toward relevant preparation for further pursuits. And finally, we plan to develop a grant program to support local schools and corporations as they determine how to best deploy their proportion of federal dollars. We are getting some questions from local leaders and want to be prepared to best support them as they make these impactful decisions locally. Now to share information about Gear 2 dollars. We received approximately $26.5 million in Gear 2 funding. $13 million of these funds have been obligated for 2 partnerships with the Indiana Commission for Higher Education, Ivy Tech Community College, Vincennes University, and K-12 schools across the state of Indiana, including Crossing the Finish Line is one initiative and Bridging the Gap is the other, and those are currently underway. The remaining $13.5 million will support the development of an educator pipeline strategy. These funds will help support licensing, credentialing of teachers in high-need areas to ultimately increase the number of licensed special education teachers and the number of teachers certified to teach dual credit courses that lead to meaningful post-secondary certificate completions. IDOE will also implement a real-time supply and demand marketplace to help identify shortage areas and inform policy decisions surrounding educator pipeline issues. Right now, we're running about a 2-year lag in our data. These initiatives will be critical to helping our students and our state move beyond the COVID-19 pandemic while also providing students with knowledge, skills, and pathways to improve our students' entire lifelong trajectory. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to share this plan with you today and are happy to answer any questions you might have. And if we can't answer, we're glad to circle back with you. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Very in-depth and meaningful. Thank you. Questions? Senator Kadora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Jenner, thank you so much. I enjoyed meeting with you and I appreciate your leadership and your staff. You've done an amazing job. A couple of quick questions, either to you or to your team members. The first one is just a simple question. On the sheet that was distributed to us, the total dollar figure at the bottom is $97.5 million describing the plan. When I look at the formal material that was disseminated to us via email, and I add the both packages, I come up with $113 million. So there's a difference of almost $13 million between both numbers. Did I miss something or?
So there's a $13.5 million amount, great question, by the way, that was already obligated, and that's the partnership with Ivy Tech, Vincennes, CHE, K-12 schools across the state, the Bridging the Gap initiative and the Crossing the Finish Line initiative.
Got it. Excellent. My
Yeah.
second question, if you don't mind, and that might be to FSSA, but as far as pre-K funding under the American Rescue Plan dollars, talking about priorities for dealing with learning loss, the House Bill 1008 that we passed, and a bunch of other programs that we supported, I know that we, in the state budget, we maintained a flat line funding for pre-K. Within your priorities to help with educational attainment and helping young kids grow to learn and get into the educational or the academic settings, is there a priority to be emphasized on pre-K in that plan?
I'm so glad you asked that. And kind of coincidentally, Dr. Jen Sullivan and the FSSA team is right after us. So right now, the federal dollars flow to FSSA, and then we work together with FSSA as the Department of Education as partners. And we're very, very focused and eager to lean in on not only the increasing the quantity of students we're serving in Indiana in early learning, we know it deeply matters, and continue to have our eyes directly on the quality that we're providing as well. And they could probably answer some additional questions for you, but I'll give you a quick example that we share with others. There's a superintendent in an urban district who called recently and said, some of my students come in and don't know the difference between a small letter M and a number 2. It's a direct quote. But 30 miles down the road, they can count to 100. They come in ready to count to 100. They can write their letters, lowercase, uppercase. And what that superintendent was advocating for is, let us show how we're growing kids. Is there some way that we can show that? Because it's really incredible work that's happening in that early learning space when students have access, as well as the pre-grade 3, where they're really learning. But thank you. Yeah. I'm glad you lifted that up.
Well, I appreciate that, and we'll follow up with the team at FSSA on this. Recently, the GPS report that was kind of funded by the Lilly Endowment and produced by the CICP, where they contracted with the Brookings Institute and the American Enterprise Institute, they came up with a very strong conclusion about Indiana and Indiana's workforce. And the conclusion was that workforce or economic development and growth in Indiana, no matter how many open jobs we have, will continue to lag behind the nation in terms of living wages, good paying jobs, because there's a direct correlation between educational attainment and workforce development. So the conclusion of that report by among the best institutions in the country is that we can be spending hundreds of millions of dollars on economic development, trying to upskill people and fill existing open jobs, but as long as we're not investing upfront in the educational system, then we will always be playing catch up, and we will be always spending hundreds of millions of dollars on economic growth. So to me, this is an area that I'm extremely passionate about. I appreciate your leadership and your team. I look forward to supporting you and FSSA to ensure that we're investing in these kids. And just briefly, I know that we had conversations last session on where we can spend our meaningful dollars on pre-K. There were some barriers. We noticed a little bit drop in pre-K enrollment, but I think there was meaningful conversation about improving the capacity and the quality of providers. And I think that's more appropriate for FSSA, because we can spend hundreds of millions of dollars on enrolling students, but we still have a problem with the quality of providers in the state of Indiana to be safe and be able to provide the necessary education. So I look forward to supporting your efforts.
And Senator, I'm so glad that you lifted that point up from Brookings. We read that data too, and there are multiple other the right data pieces that support that information about educational attainment, and specifically the data and the opportunity for the educational attainment strategies in K-12 space. That we have so much momentum there in our communities, and we look forward to digging in. So thank you for that point.
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Secretary, for your presentation and all the great detail. I, too, want to lift up pre-K.
Yes,
I did hope that in this past budget cycle we would fund pre-K for all eligible. We haven't done that, but it sounds like there might be, there's certainly going to be progress towards getting more students access.
I didn't mean to interrupt. Finish your question and jump in.
And then I'll just, yeah.
So that is an area that we are really, really interested in and partnering closely with FSSA on some of the opportunities to further increase access. And I think they're the best to lean in on some of the specifics there. Okay. So they're out in the hallway, and I'm sure they're listening and thinking through. But we are eager as a Department of Education team to lean in and help with that. We recently visited a school in Noble County who had developed an early learning program. We're seeing some of these right in their schools. So again, that seamless transition happens early. The family connection and engagement happens early. And we're eager to support schools in doing that. We're actually hearing some schools talking about spending some of their discretionary dollars to support more early learning access in their schools with their local dollars. So.
Wonderful. I encourage you to look at Lawrence Township as well. They have a wonderful early learning program, and I know they'd love to serve more children.
Yes.
And I'm encouraged by your remarks, and I'll save any more comments for the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. I'm curious about the Regional Pathway Innovation Fund and the GWC Summer Bridge Program. So in the Pathway Fund in particular, you talk about promoting collaboration between K-12 and higher education, among others. But I'm curious, has anyone given any thought to fund some of the bridge programs at some of our universities? I know USI has one. Dr. Oshan presented it this past session in our appropriations. I know Ball State has one. Has there been any thought to you funding those programs that are in existence? Because those are the very programs where they've already identified children, they've already decided to go to college, and they may need a little bit extra help, whether academically or life skills. And can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I can. And I mentioned Dr. Sullivan earlier with FSSA. Commissioner Lubbers is a frequent call as well, because again, we have to blur the lines to give our people in Indiana the best access. So the bridge programs that I mentioned today, and I did not get specific, so I'll give you a little bit more specifics. We started a couple of bridge programs pretty quickly in April. We knew that seniors were graduating. We had a month and a half to get something working. So we have the Bridging the Gap initiative, which is specifically, and we'll make sure to send you all this information and some of the data, but the Bridging the Gap initiative specifically was to target students who maybe didn't hit their English or math benchmarks, but we know, again, educational attainment matters. We know that connection between high school graduation and college, that bridge time we have to focus on. So we did partner with CHE to support and fund that. That's what that $13.5 million that we talked about earlier. The other one is, and this data kind of, I'll tell you, it shocked me. The other one is called Crossing the Finish Line Initiative. We basically worked with Vincennes and Ivy Tech to pull all of the data for students. They're our largest dual credit providers in the state, to see what students are within 6 to 9 credits of completing a post-secondary credential. 6 to 9 credits is 2 to 3 classes. We had over 3,600 students in Indiana who were that close to completing a credential. And so what we said is we are willing to pay for the coursework and the books if you're willing to complete that. We had 1,700 students enroll and are working on that right now. And that's the data that kind of shocked me. 1,700 students representing more than 270 Indiana high schools are working on that credential completion opportunity right now. I know you mentioned a couple other specific higher education programs that are working on Bridge that I'm going to have to dig into with Commissioner Lubbers. I'm just not as familiar with the other two, but I think we have to actively be talking about how to support what is working. And so if those are a couple that are, we want to definitely dig in.
Well, and I appreciate that. And so I did hear about the Crossing the Finish Line, Bridging the Gap. They both were initiated right after session adjourned, I learned, which was unfortunate. It would have been nice to have a more robust conversation during session about them. but I'm just going to kind of double down. I'm not sure I see necessarily the value of a student leaving with 30 general ed credits, which may count as some sort of a credential, when they don't know what to do with it, and it's not going to further them in the workforce. That's only the beginning step. So I appreciate this process, but it is a little disappointing to me. I don't expect you to know it, not just because you're new, but you're in the K-12 space. But I'm a little disappointed that some of our higher education institutions that have worked very hard, and I mean, I specifically remember, for example, Dr. Roshan's presentation, because he had come to appropriations 2 years ago, and as he said, did his homework and came back, and they had a wonderful program ready to go. And those are programs for children who may or may not have 15 dual credits or 30 dual credits, but those are children, and Ball State, and I forget what the name of their academy, and there were some other schools as well, but they've already started this, and they have it in place, and they're ready to go, and they know how to get those children, and they're actually going to be enrolled in their schools, as opposed to us out in sort of ether space with these other students who may not be enrolled anywhere, but we just want to get them the extra credits to get to that next credential. Because quite honestly, what I'm hearing out in my community with employers is that credential, if you will, 15 credits, 30 credits, or dual credit, the kids don't really know what they're going to do with it next. And that's not necessarily something that is translating into an employable work skill. So anyway, so I would encourage you to investigate that. Now, one more quick thing, and I remember when we looked at the $150 million, it seemed like a huge number at the time until you started digging in the $2.7 billion that the schools got directly, right? So when we are looking at some of these issues here before us, and almost $100 million that you're going to be spending before us today, are you making sure that our locals, I know my urban school started a Jump Start program. I think it's going to run 2 times, and that's targeted towards children who are really going to need.
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful, though, that the schools that are going to be participating in these some programs, they have their own monies first that they're spending, and you're sort of piggybacking, and I get the strategic planning, et cetera. Some of that's more long-term, but.
That's a great question. First money in, spend that, right? And that's something we definitely will consider in the grant process. The other thing, my mind goes always to solutions. So as you were talking, a couple things that you said that really resonated. One is that credentials have to be of value. I had a 2-hour conversation this morning with Indiana Chamber and Business and Industry across our state about this specific conversation, that credentials have to be of value. I think the other thing that we're finding is when we can give students, when we can help students get a credential, get that first step. In many cases, they're first generation, right? They're the potential to save significant funding. We really are interested in leaning in on that, and I think that I'm just inviting more conversation about the Indiana College Corps specifically, and data that we could potentially share. But the credentials of value can also and should also be in our CTE space. Right, directly aligned to the talent that is needed. The other thing I noted is Dr. Rashawn from, he's at University of Evansville, right? USI. I'll have to apologize that I said that to him. But I know he is an innovator. And as you were talking, I was thinking about our vision for the Regional Pathway Innovation Fund, and I think they would be a prime applicant that we would love to see help continue to bridge. And so again, I'll circle with Commissioner Lubbers after this to learn more. So thank you for that. Yes.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. Anything further you'd like to add?
Thank you for the opportunity to share. I know it was lengthy, but I do appreciate your patience and your interest.
Thank you for your expertise. Thank you. Next is Family and Social Service Administration. Ms. Norvell.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Nicole Norvell. I'm the Director of the Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning under the Family and Social Services Administration. I think the first section of funding that we are going to speak about today are the discretionary dollars that have been afforded to us through the Child Care Development Fund. The COVID-19 public health emergency has highlighted and exacerbated the fragility of the child care system and the urgent need for resources and reforms. Even before the pandemic, child care businesses typically operated at a very slim profit margin. Early educators have continuously shown high rates of utilization of public income support such as Medicaid, SNAP, and TANF. The low wages paid to early educators stands to provide instability within their own family structure, but also disrupts the stable relationships between children and providers that's important for child development, well-being, and success in their future education. These additional discretionary funds provide states an unprecedented opportunity to address gaps in access to high-quality early learning for families, as well as reduce the inequities of the workforce, which is overwhelmingly small businesses owned by women and disproportionately owned by women of color. These funds will allow us to focus resources to invest in early education in the ways that strengthen the system and ensure that families have equal access to quality, affordable early learning that can support them during and after the pandemic. I believe we've provided you a summary of what the funding can be utilized for, any federal guidance that we've received, and I'll spend just a few minutes focusing on our proposal as how we might spend these funds. So first, we believe that because it's an unprecedented opportunity, we want to understand more fully from our communities as to how we can best meet their needs. So we have convened a group of community leaders that included folks from the Fairbanks Foundation, the Lilly Endowment, United Ways, Early Learning Indiana, and other community foundations so that we could understand how they believe we can best invest in early childhood education. The Community Roundtable provided really vital input for the beginning stages of a plan to use these CCDF discretionary funds. Emerging themes from that roundtable were things such as investing and modeling employer-supported childcare models after work that's done in states like Texas, and other local examples such as Boar's Head in Henry County, Indiana. Developing comprehensive workforce development strategies that include forward-thinking models for compensation, accelerated preparation models for educators and other workforce investments, restructuring our child care licensing system to account for small center-based care versus large center-based care to provide greater opportunities for access to high-quality learning, especially in rural communities. Exploring sustainable funding streams implemented in other states, such as tax credit models, building intentional systems and investing in rural child care infrastructure, including how they may be supported in engaging in programs like the Child Care Development Fund and our Paths to Quality system. Creating programs for child care workers as a means of attracting them into the industry, and discussing investments to address the lack of infant and toddler care that is available to families, including financial incentives and offering care, incentives to offer care and address stereotypes and stigmas that sometimes come along with working in the field. We will then be hosting sessions in the months of July and August virtually for our provider base and families to join in and provide input as well. All of that information will then be taken, and we would like to partner with the Opportunities Exchange, which is a firm that has a lot of national experts to help us understand what other states are doing, what models are there that we may replicate, to then put forth to our communities a plan for their input that we can receive feedback from before we do any implementation. I'm happy to take questions or can go into the other funding stream, whatever you prefer.
Any questions? Senator Kadora.
Nicole, thank you for your presentation. I'll be very brief on the same question that I asked to our Secretary of Education.
Yes.
So I understand this is a proposal to spend these dollars on the items that are listed. Do you have any, not a forecast, but any idea of how much a portion of these dollars will be directly invested in expanding the pre-K system in Indiana?
I don't know that I have a great estimate of that at this time because I think that varies by community. So I think in some communities we've had broad adoption of pre-K and a good understanding of why that's important, and in other communities we have not. So I definitely think a portion of the funding can and should be utilized to expand that, but I think that that's information we'll gather as we do these community roundtables to learn more about what each community feels they need at this point.
Well, I appreciate it. This is a topic, as a member of the Education Committee and the Subcommittee on School Funding, and I know that Representative Carrie Hamilton and I shared that passion. Would love to be engaged in this through our formal committees and community engagement processes to be sure that we can assist you and support you. This is one of the most critical programs that I think we need to support. I appreciate
Agreed.
it.
We would welcome your participation in any way that you would like to offer
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks so much for the presentation. And I do second Senator Kadura's remarks. I have a comment and a question. I was glad you mentioned the tax credit part of the conversation that will be happening. I've offered a child care tax credit bill a couple of times, and I think it's a good tool we should have in Indiana to help make child care more affordable for families. I've got a question about a particular piece here. It says advanced comprehensive workforce development strategies around compensation. Now, yes. I know that means how do we pay people more to do this important work, but
yes,
can you dig into that a little bit more?
Sure, I think so. Childcare is a little bit of a complex funding stream, right? So if you're a childcare operator in our state, you oftentimes have multiple ways that you're receiving revenue. So one certainly is from our office through the Child Care Development Fund. And so that supports low-income families who are working or going to school, or right now also searching for work. And they have to meet a certain income threshold. But you also likely have private pay families. So families like some of us in the room who we would have paid for childcare or pre-K for our students. Because of that, then what happens is they have to take all of that money and figure out then how do they set wages. The issue is to increase wages often means then they increase their rates. And while childcare is unaffordable in a lot of ways, especially for infants and toddlers, they're often hesitant to do that because for fear that parents won't come. So I think what the nation faces, and this is something we talk about in the childcare space all the time, which is, how do we appropriately compensate those who are doing some of the most important work, right? We know kids, their brains develop the most in that birth to 5 space, but they're often being paid minimum wage. And so how do we think about restructuring payment systems differently so that they could increase those wages, so that they're not having to put that on the backs of private pay parents who are then coming and then can no longer afford to attend?
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I appreciate that answer. I think that's a really important piece of this work. I think that's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your question. Just quickly, in the past, I recall that we've not spent all of our On My Way pre-K dollars. Has that been the case in the more recent years?
I would definitely say last year was a unique year. We didn't have as many families participate in On My Way pre-K, but that really was indicative of families' hesitancy to have their children in larger settings, right? So certainly during the heart of COVID-19, families with young children were very hesitant to send their children to a pre-K program or a childcare. We saw enrollment increase as public schools started to open back up more consistently, but certainly we did not spend everything because we just didn't have the same enrollment. In 2019, though, however, we came very close to spending that, but it's important to remember that you all as our kind of guiding force did some things to help us to be able to draw down federal funding for On My Way pre-K. So while the state appropriation is $22 million, we're often drawing down at least $30 million, if not more, in federal funds. And so that has often led us to not spend as many state dollars so that we can spend more of those federal funds.
And so is considering restructuring the licensing system, because the On My Way pre-K, I believe, only pays for Pathways to Quality, 3 and up? Is
Yes,
that right?
That's correct.
So is that something that you're considering, or is it the licensing with respect to the childcare workers?
So licensing covers a multitude of things. And so in order to be passed to quality level 3 or 4, you also have to be licensed. So licensing is kind of the basics of health and safety. Where passed to quality, we're really looking at those quality pieces. So things like the curriculum you're using, the education of your staff, those components. Our licensing regulations have evolved over time, but probably haven't kept up as much with the way that the service is delivered. So for example, in some states, they have licensing regulations for small child childcare centers versus just large ones. We only have regulations for childcare centers here, and the cost model is very different if you're running a large center versus a small one. And so because we don't have that, the cost is sometimes too much for folks to open up a center in a small rural county because there aren't as many kids who can come. And so what we're trying to decide is what are the levers we have to make care more affordable and more accessible, thinking about our licensing regulations and maybe barriers that they pose, while maintaining, good health and safety mechanisms to make sure kids are growing and doing all the things we want them to do in early education.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. Next topic then. Do you have
Sure.
more?
Yes, one more. So we also have been afforded through Congress the opportunity through the American Rescue Plan to be asked to administer stabilization grants. And so the public health emergency certainly highlighted the critical role that child care plays in supporting children, families, businesses, and the economy as a whole. It also brought to the forefront the fragility of our child care market. Childcare is essential for our communities to thrive, but the system's current structure means many families cannot access or afford high-quality care. Childcare can be one of the greatest financial hurdles for parents when raising children. Infant care for one Hoosier child would take up to 22% of a median family's income in Indiana. Indiana currently ranks 18th for the most expensive infant care in the nation, with the average annual cost of infant care in Indiana being $12,612, equaling $1,051 per month, making Indiana one of 33 states where infant care is more expensive than college. The American Rescue Plan stabilization grants represents an important opportunity for states to stabilize the child care sector and do so in a way that rebuilds a stronger child care system that supports the developmental and learning needs of children, meets parents' needs and preferences with equal access to high-quality child care, and supports a professionalized workforce that is compensated for the essential skills and work that they do. And again, I think we've provided you just a brief overview. However, this one is a little bit different because the funding is really intended to provide these grants directly to providers. And you'll see in the guidance that we were afforded a couple of ways to do that. We are proposing to choose the second option that you see in your document, which is really around cost modeling. So we completed a narrow cost study in 2020 and 2021, which included information from a sampling of our child care programs and captured operating expenses by geographic region, setting, age group, schedule, and quality level. Using that information, it will allow us to produce a cost estimation through modeling and provide the least burden for child care programs. Programs will apply through an electronic application, be shown the cost modeling and any assumptions that were made in those models, and then have the opportunity to certify that those cost models are representative of their child care. In the instances where cost models are not representative, the child care will be able to provide detailed information and have their stabilization grant payment recalculated. Stabilization grant payments will occur in a 6-month interval until the funds are expended to allow for data collection, analysis, and restructuring of those cost models if needed.
Any questions? Thank you. Do you have any more?
No, thank you so much for your time.
Okay, next, Mr. Chaddery.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here. My name is Jay Chaudhary. I'm the director of the Indiana Division of Mental Health and Addiction at FSSA. I'm here to talk to you today about some really exciting opportunities that don't come without challenges, but opportunities to address the part of COVID-19 that's unfortunately going to resonate beyond the public health emergency, which is the impact of the pandemic on the mental health and SUD issues that we all know, many of our constituents know that are faced around our state. And so before I get into the details of the funding, I just wanted to chat a little bit about kind of the principles that we're using to maximize this one-time funding. One-time funding presents many challenges as well as opportunities. And so DMHA, one of the things that we're trying to do is striving to avoid the cliff effect. So we don't want to build programs that have expiring funding that will just end, which will leave both providers and clients with nowhere to turn. So instead of cliffs, we're thinking about how can we build bridges to the future. And we have kind of 3 core principles that guide all of our work at DMHA. We kind of tongue-in-cheek call them our triple aim, not to borrow from the healthcare side of it. And so we are striving to build a system for Hoosiers that improves both access, quality, and integration. So access to care, quality of care, so evidence-based practices and making sure that Hoosiers are able to get the best quality care. And then integration, because as we know, the mental health and SUD system kind of touches many, many different other systems. And so as we look at the one-time funding that we have, and so we have, this ARP funding as well as the funding that the legislature appropriated to us from the American Rescue Plan Fiscal Relief Fund, we're looking at kind of 4 different things. We're looking at evaluation. So we want to make sure we rigorously evaluate all of our programs to kind of make the case, or to make the case for extending or not extending those programs. We're looking at the concept of multipliers. So we want to make sure that we fund and promote programs that can serve with an impact that kind of resonates beyond the life of the project. So like infrastructure building or large-scale process improvements. We're looking for things that can be scaled. So we want to fund some pilots that we can take a look at various parts of the state to decide if we want to scale them kind of statewide. And are they able to be scaled? And then also, are they able to be evaluated? And then finally, and kind of most importantly, we are approaching this through the lens of what we're calling radical collaboration. We know we can't go at this alone, and the state shouldn't go at this alone. We have philanthropy, the private sector, local communities, local governments, the legislature, and we want to make sure that we collaborate as much as possible. So as we turn to the funding that's been that we've been put in charge of stewarding through the ARP, there's really 2 separate buckets of funding, but I'm going to treat them as one for our purposes. We can deconstruct and unpack them if you would like. So we have the Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment Block Grant, which is $26 million and change, as well as the Mental Health Block Grant, which is $25 million, almost $26 million. And so these are, although these ARP supplements have their own reporting requirements and application processes, they have to be approved by SAMHSA. They're essentially extensions of the regular Mental Health Block Grant and Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment Block Grant that we receive annually. And it's important to remember that both of these are fairly prescriptive programs. And I don't want to go into the details of how prescriptive necessarily, although I'm happy to if there's questions about that. But essentially, the Mental Health Block Grant has to be used for services targeting individuals with either serious mental illness in the case of adults or serious emotional disturbance in the case of children. And so this has caused us some issues in the past because we want to use this funding for programs that don't necessarily have a direct link with that population. I think when we talk about mental health in Indiana, we're talking about both this SMI SED population, but also the overall, mental health and anxiety of Hoosiers, that has increased as a result of the pandemic. So because of these federal requirements, we can only use this funding to focus on that first group, which is, a limitation that, we accept, and we have other ideas and plans with other funding to use for that second population. For the SAPT block grant, there are even some more prescriptive requirements. So 20% of the block grant has to be used for what's called primary prevention. So this is preventing substance use disorder in individuals that have never used substances before. Normally targeted towards children, although not necessarily, and that's a very prescriptive kind of six-step model that we have to follow and report on to SAMHSA, and we're still going back and forth with SAMHSA on some of the particulars of our regular prevention program, just to make sure that we're able to follow that. And the rest of the funding has to be spent on treatment or recovery supports for individuals with SUD. And then there has to be a particular emphasis on, when this is their language, not ours, underserved or marginalized populations, with an even more prescriptive set aside of 5% has to go towards women's services. In addition to those parameters, there are some specific set-asides within the mental health block grant that we have to follow. We have to put 10% towards what's called first episode psychosis prevention. So this is interventions that are geared towards that 16 to 24-year-old age group where a diagnosis of serious mental illness first manifests. And so these are programs that are geared towards intervening at that first episode with the idea of diverting folks down a different path and onto a different trajectory. And another 5% has to be spent on crisis response. And so a number that I need you all to get used to hearing is 988. 988 is the new 3-digit number that's going to go into effect in July 2022, whether we like it or not, by federal legislation. That's going to be the single source for both suicide hotline calls and mental health crisis calls in the state of Indiana. And we are building a pretty robust system right now with a lot of our funding. We have a sort of a statewide coalition of lots of stakeholders. We have 911 on board. We have 211 on board. And we are really excited to use this federal money to really build up that infrastructure to make sure that once we have to go live in July 2022, that we're able to handle that. So in addition to the first episode, psychosis and crisis response, there's a handful of other things that we're going to do. One of the things I was pretty hands off with my staff on this, but I said we have to support families if we can, because it's families of children with serious emotional disturbance, because those are the most heartbreaking calls I get, right? When a mom or a dad whose child is going through this just calls me and you can just hear their voice just breaking and struggling. And so we don't know what yet, but we wanted to make sure that we set aside something to provide respite and support. So we have a small program called the Respite Program, which provides support for these families, and we want to do all we can to make sure we beef that up. Also on the children's side, we have a federally funded Medicaid program called the Children's Mental Health Wraparound Program. And we are going to use this to kind of standardize and make this seamlessly integrated throughout the state. And so I think, again, when you think about something that'll serve as a multiplier as opposed to just kind of an increase in services, that's what we're looking at. We have a lot of great partnership opportunities, in particular one with IHCDA. So they have, I'm sure you're aware, they have a lot of money for housing vouchers. And so this will pay for housing and rental payments. And so we're going to go alongside that and provide supportive services or fund supportive services for Hoosiers experiencing homelessness to go alongside these housing vouchers to really ensure that the folks that receive these vouchers will succeed in this program. Yeah, and there's a few other things. I'm not going to go into every single one. You were provided with the list. The one other thing I'll highlight there is that clinical leadership training. Similar to childcare, workforce is sort of the straw that stirs the drink with mental health as well, and it's a major problem. Despite all our all our ideas, if we don't have workforce to implement them, it's unclear how far we're going to get. And so we're doing a few things with some of the other funding streams, but the one thing we're really excited about with this one is to really beef up that clinical leadership training, and under the adage that people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. And so we want to make sure that the clinical leadership that folks get at our various providers around the state is as good as can be, because a lot of these providers and organizations don't really have the time or ability to do that themselves. So I guess I'll pause there on the mental health side if there's anything else. Oh, the last thing I wanted to highlight, I guess, is this support for community ideas. Like, we really don't want to take a top-down approach to this money. We know that there's a lot of great ideas and energy in the community. And so we plan on devoting a significant portion of this funding to sort of a competitive RFP process, similar to how a foundation would for community ideas. So again, it's hard to say because the whole point of this is to solicit those ideas, but we're really excited to see what communities come up with. So I will pause there for the mental health portion. If there's
any questions? Representative Hamilton.
Just a quick question. Thank you, Director Chaudhry. About the support for families, that sounds really important to me, just in conversations I've had with constituents, and so I appreciate you raising that up. Can you just give an example, a quick example of what that might look like?
Yeah, so within our respite program, what we have is, so we have the ability for parents to drop off other siblings so that are not the patient, if you will. Right now, it's really limited. It's usually only in the context of getting the other kid treatment, right? So it's kind of a place for them to go. But really, my vision here is like the Ronald McDonald House. I mean, that may be lofty. I don't know if that's something we can pull off. But ultimately, addiction and SUD and mental health is a family disease, and so if you're familiar with that program, what they do is they essentially wrap these families around with supports. And I think that to the extent that we can, we'd like to do the same thing.
Senator Brown.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I guess so it looks like you have a 15% set aside automatically in the first 25 million, 25% in the next, and you're talking about, though, in your notes, at least the notes here, and additionally a significant funding for the locals, which you said is going to be an RFP. So you don't know how much of the remaining monies, and also, I'm going to continue to ask the question, are you going to, with this RFP process, make sure the locals are spending their dollars first, even if they have a unique and innovative program, unless for some reason, with all the federal dollars flowing to the locals directly, they're not allowed to spend it in that manner?
Yeah, absolutely. So, similar to, we're calling this taking a foundation approach, so kind of similar to the way a lot of foundations do it. I think we're contemplating the notion of a local match component into this, so we want to make sure that the locals have kind of skin in the game and everything. And so, again, we're still developing what that application process would look like, but I think we would probably have some sort of local match component, number one. Number two, we put the onus on the locals to make sure they're complying with all these requirements.
Thank you.
Further questions? Do you have anything else, sir?
Yeah, so just really quickly on the substance abuse and prevention treatment side of things. So this is a little more neatly broken up. Mental health is a lot more sprawling and kind of unwieldy, but the substance abuse prevention and treatment, I mean, two of the areas are in the name, prevention and treatment. So prevention, again, we'll use this. We have a really robust network of statewide prevention sites that have coverage in all 92 counties, and so we're going to use this to support them in the ways indicated here. And then treatment, we have a few evidence-based treatment modalities that have shown a lot of promise in other places on kind of small-scale clinical trial type levels. And so there's one in particular we'd like to bring here, which is called multi-systemic therapy, which is targeted towards kiddos with significant trauma or justice involvement. And so this is a very intensive wraparound model where clinicians are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They go into the homes, they go into other places where these folks are, they go into the juvenile facilities, they go into the schools. And again, the early evidence on this is very encouraging for some of the hardest to reach kids. So we want to use this to pilot that model here, and then depending on the outcomes, we may be back in front of you in a couple years to ask for some more support. And the other thing I wanted to make sure to hit was the notion of recovery supports. I think we forget about recovery supports a lot of times when we talk about substance use disorder. We focus on that prevention and treatment, but recovery is the rest of somebody's life. And so, and one of the biggest tools we have in our toolkit is peer recovery coaches. So people with lived experience that decide to devote their lives to helping others who are in that situation. And so we are leading, I would say we're leading the pack. Kind of nationally in a few different peer models, and so, we hope to use this funding to take that to the next level. And again, the same support for community ideas under this as well. So that's the SAPT in a nutshell.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Taylor?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Allison Taylor. I am the Director of the Office of Medicaid Policy and Planning within FSSA, and I am here to present on the American Rescue Plan funding that's available to states to enhance, expand, or strengthen home and community-based services under Medicaid. I'm going to summarize the legislation and related federal guidance, and then present you with a summary of our proposed approach on the spend plan. So first, the mechanics of it. The ARP temporarily increases federal medical assistance percentage or match by 10 percentage points for certain Medicaid HCBS expenditures beginning April 1st, 2021 and ending March 31st, 2022. And I'm gonna walk you through a few steps. As most things, Medicaid is a little tricky as we kind of walk through the mechanics of it, but I want to make sure you kind of understand how we get here. So our annual HCBS spend in Indiana, about $2.26 billion, and that additional 10% FMAP frees up about $226 million in state funding. And so that number, that 226 is key because it's what we can reinvest and draw down additional matching dollars. So saying, I just want to point out, so if you look at the top of the page, you're saying, but there's the estimated funding, it's a range and it's bigger. And so I'm going to explain how we get there in the next couple of sentences. So a few things to be aware of. States are given a 3-year period, so through March 31st, 2024, to spend this additional funding, which is great because it does allow states to be really thoughtful, think long-term, strategically. Jay mentioned avoiding cliffs. I think we're right in with that philosophy, right? How do we make strategic investments? And so it is because of this ability to spend over the 3-year period, that is what causes the number at the top of your sheet, the estimated amount of federal funding available to us, to vary, because that $226 million, when reinvested, it'll be matched at different federal levels depending on the year that it's spent among the 3 years. So for illustration, during year 1, which again is April 1st, 2021 through March 31st, 2022, HCBS expenses are eligible for that 10% FMAP bump. There's also, right now, a 6.2% COVID bump in place. And so assuming we could, maximize spend and get at least a third of that new spend out the door in year 1, that results in the larger number that you see at the top. So that's the $877 million to invest in HCBS over the 3-year period. A different scenario on the low end would be if we were unable to make any new HCBS investments in this year 1 period through March 2022, then in that case, we would be down at the $670 million. That's because in the 2nd and 3rd years, that enhanced 10% isn't there, so we're kind of defaulting to the regular match rates. So that is why you see a range at the top as to what is potentially available. Depends on when we spend the additional state funding. There are, and if you take a look at the sheet, we provided an illustration, just a few requirements. There's parameters around the spend. The funding from the 10% FMAP, it has to be reinvested in new spend to enhance, expand HCBS. It can't replace, supplant, or backfill. So that's a critical component. The federal legislation and CMS guidance says really quite specifically the HCBS services that are eligible. We provided a list in the document before you. I'll switch to kind of the second part of my quick summary is really all about the spend plan and what you're probably most interested in. So we are, through the federal legislation, required to submit a spend plan to CMS and then provide quarterly updates on how we will approach this incredible opportunity to maximize these HCBS investments. Spend plans were originally due to CMS on June 12th, 2021. Guidance came out early May about this opportunity. States, Indiana, along with almost everybody, some states were able to get it in time. Most states got a 30-day extension. We pursued that 30-day extension. We really wanted to have the maximum amount of time to engage with our stakeholders and time to engage with this committee. So our new due date for the spend plan is July 11th, 2021. And then again, along the way, we'll have to submit quarterly reports. Just a couple of comments as we worked on this initial spend plan. A really incredible thing for Indiana in particular, we were able and are able to lean really heavily into our current collaborative process to reform long-term services and supports. HCBS is a really big component of that. And to date, we've gathered feedback from stakeholders in 50+ different stakeholder forums and venues. The feedback from those forums are very similar to the stuff that you see in this document. Themes of focusing on workforce, provider capacity, integrating care, timely care, quality choices in the community. That's the feedback from this other LTSS collaborative work. To make sure we were really on point and in tune with our stakeholders, we actually, as it relates to this spend plan, issued a survey to our stakeholders. We had 660 responses from recipients and potential recipients of HCBS, family caregivers, direct support professionals, HCBS industry providers, associations, and other stakeholders. Resoundingly, the feedback from the survey, the top theme really was around workforce. So they were, let's see, we asked individuals, the survey recipients, to identify what their priorities for the spend plan would be. And again, universally, it was really provider workforce development, and then HCBS provider capacity was a close second. So in addition to the 660 general kind of survey responses, we got 85 individual comments and write-ins. Similar themes, but I also just want to acknowledge that there were specific comments on potential expansion opportunities, again, interest in individual provider ideas to expand HCBS, benefits and challenges of technology, a big issue. Comments on transportation options and what the impact in HCBS would be, and of course, reimbursement rates, compensation, were other items that came up. I will just say in our work to date, and the survey results really confirm that the challenges facing individuals in the community really seem to ring true across populations and across divisions and programs. So whether we're talking aging, IDD, rural, urban, we really see an opportunity to take the spend plan and really focus across divisions to develop solutions to challenges and long-term ones, not just kick problems down the road. So the initial spend plan, our approach is provided before you. We've identified really 5 major themes or priority areas to focus as we develop the spend plan. So first, stabilization, putting about 20% of the available funding into the here and now to stabilize provider networks, one-time grants to providers, frontline direct support workforce, and providing caregiver supports. And then we also tried to break out the additional emphasis areas, again, aligned both with our survey results and stakeholder feedback, making workforce a priority, 25% in recruitment, retention, career development, focusing on cultural competent workforce, career ladders. Another large portion represented again by stakeholder feedback and survey, building provider capacity. We have a really critical opportunity to think long-term about rates and rate setting and who should be on our HCBS bench in terms of providers. And so we're gonna take the time to really make sure that we have a premier and transparent, consistent methodology and approach to set us up for long-term success. 2 other buckets, an important one, 5% into caregiver training and support. So Indiana ranked actually 51st in the AARP survey on overall support of caregivers. We know we have to invest heavily there. So that will be a priority for us in terms of training and support and identifying kind of gaps there. And then finally, another really important bucket, enhancing HCBS. That'll be about 20%. So this could include things like continuing our presumptive eligibility model, integrating HCBS data systems, improving quality and reducing inequities, and partnering with local organizations to focus on improving access and health disparities. So those are our initial sort of plan and approach to maximizing the investment opportunity of HCBS funding. We will be working on this ahead of the July 11th, 2021 deadline. We have committed to sharing a copy of the spend plan with stakeholders when it's ready, ahead of our submission to CMS, and of course, are here to kind of partner and engage with you and bring you updates as we proceed. So with that, Chairman, I'm happy to yield my time back to you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Taylor? Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Appreciate your testimony, Ms. Taylor. I have some questions about the reimbursement. been contacted by some home health aid organizations, and they are concerned because the traditional Medicaid did not receive an increase. And we did put some increases in the budget for certain kinds of home health, but apparently that wasn't one of them. Is that right?
So I want to recognize that we have a couple of questions, we have a handful of questions that we are researching. I don't know, like I'd have to better understand, because we are, our understanding is that, we are we're working on developing increased rates for home health. We're also looking to identify like short-term opportunities for providers in the space. We've been having conversations about the duration of long-term visits and how so I think going to the long-term methodology, I don't know the answer to your specific question on impact of home health aid, but we're working on it as a team to figure out.
Okay, that would be helpful. I mean, I was educated, I mean, I didn't realize I'm looking at least 5 buckets from the state for home health services of funding, and in addition to, private insurance, et cetera, et cetera. But my concern is, and I hear this over and over again, so I appreciate you looking into developing capacity.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't rate them, but my concern is we've already lost significant capacity. And the home health aid space, as opposed to the personal service space, which I didn't realize the difference between those, is the personal service space, my words are they're not supposed to be touching the person. It's more like doing services, washing dishes, whatever. But my concern is that sometimes they're paid the same, and the home health service can be up to a requirement of an RN. And I have personally received concerns that a quadriplegic, a young child severely burned is still in the hospital at Children's in Cincinnati because there's no home health aid available to do that. There's no one to help the quadriplegic who had reached out to 20 agencies. And not because they're not willing to take care of those patients. There's literally not the capacity now to do that. The other concern, and I know I shared this with you, is that we may or may not, and you're investigating that, and I appreciate that, because I did share these with you beforehand, because it was an extensive list. We may or may not have increased rates, but sometimes we have reduced the number of authorized hours, which makes it problematic. And it is ironic when we're discussing child care, et cetera, is that some of these parents, whether they are considered the caregiver or another family member, they don't have enough hours in their own day. So I know you're looking into this, and I appreciate that. And so with that, I guess my final, well, 2 final things is I know you are in the process of looking at some of the waivers that were enacted under this pandemic in terms of whether it's telehealth or licensing, et cetera. Some of these have been beneficial to the home health because they are so highly regulated. And so I know you're having a conversation with them. You've sent out surveys to see, and hopefully it'll be safe for the patient and or Hoosier, but also less burdensome. But also, as you're moving into managed care in this space, perhaps as you're contemplating moving into managed care in the long-term care facility space, I've now started to receive concerns about the billing process, which is kind of ironic, quite frankly, because my first foray onto the Medicaid Advisory Committee was about the credentialing in one portal, and that didn't happen, and the managed care entities all have their own system. We had, it sounds like, one portal in the home health space for billing, and now we may be moving to multiple paying database systems, which are becoming more burdensome and costly for these home health. So I put those out there. I know you're working on them. That's a lot. That wasn't all in here. But because we have the flexibility and we have a lot of dollars, I hope we're continuing to do rigorous work in this, because we know we are pushing, in a good way, people to stay in their homes or in a different system rather than the long-term care facilities, which are the highest cost and the highest nursing level, which not everyone needs.
Thank you.
That's kind of a long question and kind of a comment.
So we will respond in specific detail to a handful of your questions. If I maybe could just lift up and maybe reinforce a couple of themes and comments. You highlighted a place in terms of home health and personal services that I'm just, as someone who runs the Medicaid program, is so pleased to have the opportunity to really think critically about the infrastructure and the systems and the regulatory interplay, because we do find ourselves in, you get to a place and you kind of look back and how did we get here? And I think we do need to have a conversation with industry to really understand, is this an anomaly? Do we have the right incentives and opportunities? And so that space, I feel like we really owe it to industry to get to a better place. And I think managed care is an incredible opportunity, but it doesn't fix underlying or inherent issues with some of the infrastructure there. So that is absolutely, it's a part of, I mentioned the rate methodology work. That's a part of it. So taking a look, making sure we did this with a small portion with some of our HCBS waivers, took a look at our methodology and found just some inconsistencies that didn't make sense. And actually, there were impacts on providers and their bottom lines and the way they practice. So really trying to shore those up. And I look forward to doing that consistently across Medicaid. I think we're going to learn a lot and have a much better efficient system that's ready to handle more folks at home. So I just want to say, yeah, I hear you. And I think those are all the right things to be thinking about. And I appreciate the comment.
Well, then just to follow up, I might say in the past, because there is not capacity in the current system, some of those dollars that were set aside that have been allocated and or credited, if you will, to an individual have gone unused because they can't get a caregiver, whatever capacity they're looking for. So we sweep that and put that back into our general fund, and so then it kind of perpetuates. If we don't give increases and we don't give a bonus or retention, which we're looking at doing for childcare, then you're not ever going to get anybody in that space, and then there will be unused dollars. So I just caution us that as much as I would love to see us save every penny, and if it's not being used, return it, I'm not sure in this instance, as we're pushing more to home health care, we should be so quick to do that all the time.
I appreciate that. And that is one thing in your questions that we have flagged to kind of, I want to go back and understand the flow and kind of what, whether and what that connection is. So I hear you, and we certainly want to, maximize and reinvest the funds too. The need is there, so.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Do you want to go to the state plan amendments under review items?
Yes, thank you very much. So, Chairman, members of the committee, I have, and I will try to be really quick, 4 state plan amendments to share. If it's all right with the chairman, I also have an update on our current 3% reduction to hospital payments that I'd love to tuck maybe at the very end of these 4 items. So to start, presenting a state plan amendment related to treat no transport for EMS or treat without transport. So this stems from legislation that mandates Medicaid reimburse emergency transportation providers when treatment is rendered, but no emergency transport is required. Honestly, this is a win on all sides, gets members treated, avoids an unnecessary hospital run, the additional expense to the system and to the family. And so we're excited about this opportunity.
Questions? Okay, next.
All right, next, we are adding language into our state plan that affirms to the federal government that we are pursuing electronic visit verification, which is required under the Cures Act. Really quickly, states, all of us were required to implement electronic visit verification for all personal care services and home health services that require an in-home visit. The personal services component has gone live already. Home health is on the horizon for 2023, and we pretty much just need to update our contract to say we are doing this, and so that's what this state plan does.
Thank you. Any questions? Next.
Okay. Next is a state plan amendment that is a result of a legislative change this year, House Bill 1405. That legislation made changes to the long-term care insurance partnership program through the Department of Insurance, actually, and they basically have to make a change under Section 6021 of the Federal Deficit Reduction Act. And so we are updating our state plan because there are impacts in transitioning to Medicaid, and so we had to update that they're following the new Deficit Reduction Act program.
Any questions? Thank you.
Okay.
And next.
All right, I think I have one more. This state plan amendment codifies the changes that were made to telehealth under Senate Enrolled Act 3. I know committee members are aware of the changes. I want to thank you for your support this past legislative session. The legislation updates definitions, expands the list of eligible providers to deliver telehealth. And so as a result, we have to make changes in our state plan to capture that expansion and extended provider list. So that is basically what this state plan amendment does. There is no fiscal to date. We've largely seen telehealth be really more of a replacement, a supplement. We haven't seen it be a tremendous onslaught of new services, but that is something that we and other states, because frankly, pretty much everyone after the pandemic is looking to expand telehealth. We're watching really closely. I think with additional data and experience, we'll see if there are actual expansions, but to date, it's been much more of a supplement and to kind of tide folks over and bridge. So,
Questions? Thank you.
all right, and then my last thank you for the opportunity. This is not anywhere on the agenda, but it's just a quick update. I know the committee's familiar with Medicaid's 3% rate reduction for hospital reimbursement. This has been a standing item in our budget for some time, but we're really pleased to share that we will not be renewing this reduction. So we're going to let it sunset July 1st, 2021. This will be about a $14.5 million impact to the state for state fiscal year 2022, $15.4 million impact in 2023. We're able to do this as a result of the favorable revenue forecast, and we just appreciate your partnership.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Great.
Mr. Basso? He's coming in? Okay. Thank you. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, everyone. My name is Luke Basso, Chief of Staff at the IEDC. I'm here to give you an update on two programs that were enacted during the last session. The first one is the continuation of the Indiana Small Business Restart Grant, which the IEDC established in May of 2020 and was reauthorized with House Bill 1004 during session. To date, we have issued 507 grants at a total of $13.3 million on an average of $25,748 per business. So combined with the first tranche that we launched May of last year, we're at about $47.8 million to Indiana small businesses on the grant program. On the second update I want to give you is also allowed for with enabling language in House Bill 1004, and that's the Indiana Hoosier Entertainment Grant. This is a program for entertainment venues, promoters, and hospitality businesses that can apply for reimbursement up to $1 million of federal dollars. This was a subset of businesses that were not getting helped by any federal or state programs. And to date, we have issued 15 grants at about $10.2 million at an average of $684,000 per grant. So, Mr. Chair, that's my update.
Any questions? Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Luke, for your presentation. In regards to the $48.7 million, of the grants that you did, how much of that went to minority businesses, if any?
On the first tranche, 219 of the businesses were minority businesses, and this time around, it's been 38 so far. But I will add that that is a voluntary box that businesses can check, so that may not be an exact number on that.
So how much is that? What's the percentage of that?
So for the first tranche, it's about 5 million of the 34 million.
5 out of 34?
Mm-hmm. And then this time around, I don't have the exact math right in front of me, Representative, so sorry about that, but 38 businesses have an average of 25,000 so far.
On the average of 25,000.
Mm-hmm.
So someone could get 5,000, somebody can get 30,000.
Yes.
40,000, okay.
Yes. So
that's the average.
Yes, so the average is 25.7, yes, sir.
Okay. If I may, please. Okay, so what are we doing at IEDC to ensure that minority businesses are taking advantage of this or promoting it to small minority businesses?
Yeah, so we're our Small Business Development Center has continually worked with their network of companies and businesses throughout the state of Indiana to make sure that they are getting the notice out as much as possible. We've also continued to have webinars as an organization. We've had different ads throughout different publications throughout the entire state on TV, paid media, websites, everything we can do to get the word out to everybody. Because we also have a similar problem with rural businesses. As you know, Representative, a lot of these businesses are worried about the next 3 days, not the next 30 days or 3 years. So we're trying to message as best we can to make sure that businesses that are in the most need are getting the help they can get.
Okay. I'd like to circle back. You say the average is 25,000 or 25. So the smaller businesses, how are you ensuring that somebody may get 5 versus somebody may get 45?
Yeah, so it's a reimbursement program. So 100% of your payroll expenses can be reimbursed, and then 80% of your other qualified expenses. So you have to show us receipts for the program. So it's up. So in some instances, it's up, or in all instances, it's up to the businesses to show us those expenses, and then we go through and look at the qualified, and then that's how we issue it.
Okay, and having said that, and I know you said that some businesses is volunteer, which I find that very interesting. I don't know what we can do about that, because I think we should have truth in granting from in regards to that. Do you have a comprehensive list of minority businesses that have received these dollars or not? I mean, you said it's volunteer, but do you have a running log?
I think we do. I'd have to go back and check. I know we did at the end of last year, and I would imagine we do for this program as well.
Okay, I think that's imperative. If you do, if it will, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see that.
Sure.
Please write that down.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm going to ask. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you. Senator Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I think what I would add to that, not just the MBE, WBE, but probably by county, who receive what by county. I'm just curious of that. The second question is there another round that's coming, and when would that be for opportunities for folks?
So by county, we break that down weekly. We can send a breakdown, and I think we've touched every county at this point. And then for the next round, we still have $42 million left in the fund. So this program relaunched right at the end of session. So we're about 2 months in, $13 million so far. So we'll continue until we run out.
So it's ongoing. It's not
a
cycle.
the way the legislation was written was that you can apply for up until December 31st of this year for expenses from from March 2020 to March 2021 of this year.
Got it.
So businesses have time, and you can requalify for your businesses. So to the representative's point, if a business applied late last year for October to December, and then they only received up to 30,000, they can come back and reapply from January to March to make up that delta of 20,000. So yeah, we want to help the businesses, and so we're gonna keep this going as long as we need to.
Is there a designated page on your website for it?
Yes. So it's I would try to give you the URL, but
Don't worry about
Indiana
it.
Restart Grant will get you right there.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mr. Johnston?
Thank you, Chairman Brown, members of the committee. I will be succinct, since we're in a late hour here. And what I'd like to do is give a brief update on the Coronavirus Relief Fund and the CARES Act. And you've heard, in fact, I'll follow up a little bit on what Luke just mentioned as far as the Small Business Restart Program, but then really pivot to get into discussing a little bit more on the American Rescue Plan. My comments today will mostly be more administrative in nature, in that the guidance has come out, and as you've heard from FSSA and the Department of Education, a lot of planning is going on right now as far as getting those grants implemented. And it really is a pivot from the Coronavirus Relief Fund and CARES Act, which was really looking at treating or addressing immediate expenses dealing with the pandemic and relief assistance. The ARP is really pivoting more towards recovery and growth, and that's where we do have the opportunity to take a little more time to think about what is going to be creating the greatest impact and an enduring impact. And I think that's what you're starting to hear from the agencies that come before you with their programs, and that is recognizing that it has a shelf life that has to be obligated and used in a certain period of time, but how can those investments be made to have an enduring impact long after the funds are extinguished? And as Allison mentioned, or maybe it was Jay Chaudhry, this is an opportunity to also look at certain pilot programs, and I think that you'll hear that as people come in, things that we've wanted to try, things that we think that we could implement and have an impact. So I think that might be more of a theme that you hear in future presentations. I have about a dozen slides here. We won't spend a lot of time on all of those, but the second page really is just, again, a recap of where we are on the Coronavirus Relief Fund and the major program areas where we've allocated the money. You've heard me before talk about the agencies that have been involved in the public health response is really FSSA providing provider support and sustaining grants. Department of Health is testing and tracing and PPE. The economic and business relief is really it dealing with DWD and workforce, the small business program that you just heard from Luke on, the local government, community, and individual assistance is the IFA program had $300 million for local units of government. You've heard from Jake Sipe before. We used part of the CRF for a rent assistance program before there was a program established in the ARP for rent assistance, and then also helping some community organizations as well. Then the direct expense recovery is really public health and public safety payroll expenses that states and recipients can reimburse those costs for. You heard from the State Board of Accounts earlier about using some of those funds, and so because that was not committed before we had presented this before, we thought it was important to bring them back, and so we want to use as much as we can of the Coronavirus Relief Fund while that money is eligible for all of those expenses, those audits that they will be conducting related to the past fiscal year. use it, and those audits will go on for the rest of the year and a little bit into next year. We'll be able to use the CRF related to those expenses, but we may have to spill that over into the American Rescue Plan funding. As he had mentioned, there'll be a tremendous amount of audits. As they said, when an entity receives over $750,000 and they spend over $750,000 of federal grants, that triggers them into what is called a single audit. And so I think Kendra had mentioned they were going from 400 some up to over 600 or close to 700 audits that they have to conduct. Again, we will use as much of the CRF as we can for those expenses, but we may have to report back that we've might have to use some of the ARP money as well. And then also your questions about the what Luke had just mentioned. That appropriation was $60 million for House Bill 1004. And so to the extent that later this year, if we start bumping up against that $60 million and there's still demand out there that we might be able to help some businesses, we'll have the ability to sort of reallocate. All this money is obligated, but we could take from some other programs if the need is there for the small business program. That's what we're going to be doing over the next couple of months. If you recall, health got a substantial amount of the CRF program for Optum testing, standing up the testing protocol, standing up the contact tracing, buying supplies, and all of that. We're going to be monitoring how much of the obligations might be left over, and we might have the ability to repurpose for other programs. Again, that was all done on the fly when they were trying to get that stood up. And as we sort of evolve through hopefully the closing days of this public health emergency, those expenses aren't as great as what they were anticipating at the time, or basically they've been met, and it frees up some of those funds. The next slide is just a stacked chart of the American Rescue Plan. That's really just all the federal dollars. As you can see, there are targeted programs, but then the biggest one, and programs for direct payments to individuals and some UI adjustments. But then you can see that the segment closest or second from the bottom is the state and local funds. And so that's where I want to spend a little more time on the ARP. And so the next couple of slides show the grants that are coming. These are not all of them, but they're the major program areas that will be receiving grants. Again, you've heard from DOE and you heard from FSSA, but here are some of the others. You can see the first page is really grants coming from Health and Human Services and are going to be administered mostly by FSSA, Department of Health, and the Housing and Community Development Authority. The focus is really, in the public health area, and then we also, we heard about mental health and the other programs from FSSA. The next slide is some of the other program areas. As you can see, education is a substantial amount, and Secretary Jenner spoke about that. You have Homeland Security, some agricultural grants that are from the U.S. Department of Agriculture going to FSSA and Department of Health, and those are mostly for WIC and administrative expenses related to SNAP. And then there's some just funds that are just direct to state agencies from their federal awarding agencies. So for the arts, library systems, and such. Then the final box there is really what I want to spend some time on, and that is the fiscal recovery plans for both state and local governments. So on the next slide, you can see that the org chart there, that a major component of the American Recovery Plan was the state and local fiscal recovery plans. The state is expected to receive in total about $3.1 billion. There's a separate amount for the Capital Projects Fund of $202 million. And then spread across local government is $1.3 billion for counties, $847 million for what the federal government deems to be metropolitan cities, and then $432 million for non-entitlement units. The state fiscal recovery fund major tenants are on the next slide. As I said, the allocation is $3.1 billion. All of those funds have been appropriated in the budget this spring. We will receive approximately 50% of that $3.1 billion. We are in the process of drawing that money down. You'll be, I think, heartened to know that the security features about even accessing this portal are quite extensive. And so I don't know what it means, but it wouldn't accept my upload of my driver's license. So it must have been, they didn't recognize me or something, but we'll get there anyway. But we'll be drawing on those funds. When that's accepted, as I said, about $1.5 billion will be received in a few days after they accept our application. These funds will be available for obligation through December of 2024, and then, as you heard Kendra say, the performance period is through December of 2026. The federal government just issued their interim rule, is published in May, and then there's a 60-day comment period, which I'm sure there will be further adjustments and clarifications after all of those comments are received. The next slide discusses the eligible uses. The first bullet is really what is closest to the CRF, and that is responding to the public health emergency, but it's broadened a little bit to say addressing the negative economic impacts to households, businesses, individuals, and not-for-profits. Also talked about specific industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. You can use the funds for responding to workers, essential workers, during the public health emergency by providing premium pay, and then also necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. One of the things necessary is a term of art, I think. It was in the legislation, but again, that's one of those things that draws a lot of questions. What do you mean by necessary water and wastewater and broadband infrastructure? The last one bullet here I want to spend a little time on because it does impact some of the budget decisions that were made. And so it says government services, you can spend this money on government services to the extent of reduced general revenue. The key phrases in here are government services and reduced general revenues. And so the first one, government services, has a definition. And it is in that they say, the Act provides recipients with broad latitude to use the fiscal recovery funds for the provision of government services. Government services can include, but are not limited to, the maintenance or pay-as-you-go funded building of infrastructure, including roads, modernization of cybersecurity, including hardware, software, protection of critical infrastructure, health services, environmental remediation, school or educational services, and the provision of police, fire, and other public safety services. So basically, it is whatever you spend your money on currently in your budget, that's an eligible use. The critical point, though, is the reduced general revenue. And that is based on a formula that all recipients have to calculate and eventually submit to Treasury this calculation. So it's based on the last fiscal year. See eyes glazing over already. It's based on the last fiscal year before the pandemic, so fiscal year 2019. And then they want you to compare to actual revenues, not on the future fiscal years, but future calendar years. So we're switching from fiscal year to calendar year. So you're going to go from 2019, and then we have to compare to 20, 21, 22, and 23. Now, it's not actual revenues. You build off of what they deem to be a counterfactual. And that is, you take 2019 and you're allowed to grow that 2019 by the greater of 4.1%, or your actual average growth in your general revenues from 17, 18, and 19. So you take the 3-year average. If it's higher than 4.1%, you can put that into the formula and grow your 2019 expenditures by that amount, not only for 20, but 21, 22, and 23, as that's what they are saying you should have expected to happen if the pandemic had not occurred, sort of a but-for test. So we are in the middle of calculating that and to come up with that number. Right now, it looks like our average, based on our history from 17, 18, and 19, is going to be higher than the 4.1%. 4.1% is just, I think, from the Census Bureau, the average of all states, or all units that the Census Bureau collects data on. So let me stop there on that, because that is important, because then you look at what has been appropriated, because we have some projects that fall neatly into broadband, water, wastewater, you know, all these categories that are explicitly stated. And then we have these others that will need to fall into the government services category to the extent this formula gives us the capacity to do it. Now, right now, our preliminary analysis of this indicates that we would have, there's not any challenges with funding what we adopted in the budget, what this body adopted in the budget. What my concern is what I mentioned, that this rule is still in the comment period. And so to the extent, because there's going to be other states that probably argue things that aren't necessarily in Indiana's favor. So we'll have to see what this final rule comes out with and do a final calculation. But again, let me stop there and see if any, because that was a lot. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, real quick. Chris, you had mentioned general revenues. I just wanted to clarify that the term general revenue is not the same as general fund revenue.
Yeah,
So
I'm sorry. Joe, that is exactly right. So when they say general revenues, the phrase that is used is called own source. It's called own source. That means our own sources generated it. And it's basically any revenue stream that's generated by Indiana's economy. So we don't count gas taxes in the general fund. We're able to count gas taxes as an own source, and it goes into this formula.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm trying to catch up, but I don't live it every day. I just had nightmares.
You want to?
So the 17, 18, 19, and 4.1, that's the floor. That's the minimum that we get, right?
We will be able to use 4.1 if our average does not exceed it. So that is the floor.
But will our average exceed? Did I tell you?
It looks
did you
like
say the average will 17, 18, 19 average will exceed 4.1?
Right now, we believe it does.
So that means so it's to our favor.
It is to our favor.
But then you came back and said that there are other states that's gonna in the comment period it may not be at our favor. So we got to be stronger.
Well, that's what I've learned is not to bank on anything until the final rules come out. And so we still have this period where people will be commenting on this rule, and it'll come out sometime after July 16th.
July 16th?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Jackson?
And Chris, just to clarify there, that's this 4.1 or a higher number, that's just for the kind of the catch-all category that doesn't neatly fit. That's not how much we get. That's just how much of the total 3.1 billion we can use towards everything else that doesn't
that
fit in one of those
that
other
creates
buckets.
a subset of the $3.1 billion. And so we'll take the our own source revenue from 2019. Let's just go ahead and just say we fall back, though, to the floor of 4.1%. We will increase that 2019 by 4.1%, make some adjustments from fiscal year to calendar year, and we will take that result and compare it to our revenues in 2020. That will create our first installment of potential revenue loss. We will do the same thing again, adding 4.1% from that result for 2020 into 21, and then we'll do it again in 22 and 23. Okay. It's tough at the end of the day. Yeah.
I hope this makes sense. In the recently passed budget, how much of that money is in this government services to the extent category?
I would
Can you answer that?
say right now, if you think about it, we did have broadband. You've got the water programs and infrastructure programs. I would say it's about 50-50.
Okay. Like READY doesn't fit in there.
Pardon?
READY, for example, doesn't fit in there neatly.
I think elements of READY can fit in there
Okay.
because of the negative economic impacts from the pandemic.
Okay.
But those are some of the things that we'll be
So I
monitoring.
I might just not have figured this out yet because this is, bless you for your extra heavy lifting this past year, Director Johnston. But so say we come back in our 2020 calendar year, I think is what you said is the first one that we'll look at calendar year, is 4% versus the 4.1. Do we just get 0.1?
No.
You'll get the, okay.
We get 4.1% no matter what. That is a floor, as Representative
Okay.
Porter said.
Okay.
If we get
But if we're
4.5%,
Then we're in trouble.
no, we get to grow that potential deficit even more. So we create more capacity for government services the higher our percentage is.
No, I know, I mean, from the past. But if 2020 is 4.4 or 4.5%, that's not good, right?
Oh, if 2020 came back and actually the actual numbers equal our percentage growth, then there's no revenue loss.
Okay, just flat,
That's right.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll move on to the next slide, which is a summary of all the appropriations that were funded from the ARP, and really just put them in the fiscal year in which they were put into the budget. We've identified the ones that are biennial, which have some flexibility as far as when those are allotted. As I mentioned, the next slide talks about our reporting. We just got the guidance on reporting last Thursday. There will be an interim report that's due August 31st to the U.S. Treasury. But there will also be quarterly reports for project and expenditures where we summarize the project and also then have to report on the expenditures of those projects. And then there's an annual performance report. You've heard a little bit today about the compliance requirements. There are significant compliance requirements. I mean, we're administering federal dollars, and so not only do we have audit requirements, but as Lisa had mentioned, the subrecipient monitoring is very, very significant. And so we'll have significant efforts around that. I mentioned the Capital Projects Fund. We have not received any guidance on that yet. I think the latest I'd heard is that we might get that in July, but I think everyone's focusing just on the fiscal recovery funds right now. Now I want to move into the local fiscal recovery on the last few slides here. Locals are going to receive their funds. They're bound by the same uses and restrictions. You can see the distributions here, just under $2.6 billion in 2 equal installments. 92 counties will receive $1.3 billion.
That money will go directly to them from the U.S. Treasury. In fact, some of them may have already been receiving their funds. And it's based on the relative population within the state. There's 25 metro cities, and these are U.S. Treasury and Census Bureau designations. These are not state of Indiana designations. 25 metro cities will receive $847 million, and they will also receive those directly from Treasury. This distribution, though, includes population, but also other demographic factors that the Housing and Urban Development Department uses for poverty levels and housing stock, and maybe there might be one other related to housing, but it's population and also those other factors that go into how they calculated the distributions to the metro cities. And then finally, what they call non-entitlement units, $432 million. The state government will serve as a pass-through, a conduit for the distribution of these funds. And so we are working with the Indiana Finance Authority, as I mentioned. They helped us administer the $300 million with the local programs, and I think when I last looked, they had a total of 550 entities actually came through there. But I want to talk about it because I imagine there might have been some calls received because the U.S. Treasury has left a decision to the state of Indiana, and we do have a determination related to that I wanted to inform you of. So on these non-entitlement units, basically smaller and medium-sized cities and towns, there are 542 of these incorporated entities. Indiana is deemed to be one of 8 sort of weak minor civil division states. And again, if you can bear with me here, states are responsible for distributing a portion of the local fiscal recovery allocation to non-entitlement units based on population. The Treasury established these guidelines, which states were to identify eligible non-entitlement units, and they provided a list to each state that included incorporated places, the 542, and minor civil divisions. All incorporated places on the list are required to receive a payment. Using the designations from the Census Bureau, Indiana was identified as one of these 20, but they were further identified, or we were further identified as one of 8 weak minor civil division states in which these MCDs, and this is essentially townships, play a lesser governmental role but are still active government units. These 8 states were required by the U.S. Treasury to undertake a facts and circumstances test to determine eligibility of the MCDs based on their legal and operational capacity to accept ARP funds, and a requirement, this is important, a requirement that the MCDs provide a broad range of services that would constitute eligible uses under ARP. So you have to provide a range of services. Specific authority, statutory authority, and composition of budgets are to be considered in this determination, and MCDs lacking the capacity or a broad range of ARP services should not be eligible for any non-entitlement unit distribution. So this determination has to be made and then posted on our website. And so our determination is that MCDs, in this case the townships, should be excluded. And let me talk about that a little bit. One is that the broad range of services, the things that we had talked about as far as water and sewer, those are really municipal functions. The others of directly assistance to the hospitality industry. I think if anything, there is, the services might be township assistance. But to meet the deadline, to meet the requirements, the range of services we don't believe is there. There's some other practical points to this, though, and I would just like to point that out because the $432 million, the municipalities don't keep their allocation. That's where the money comes from. And remember, townships are really extensions of county government. So the money is being taken, being reallocated from the cities and towns and possibly sharing with the townships. What that does then, it dilutes, at least to the municipalities, the amount of money per person that is distributed. And then it creates really these, I think, the federal government's not going to know the details of all of these, but the other provision in that I guess maybe I need to page ahead to the last slide here, is that the distribution to these locals cannot be more than 75% of their budget. So when you move this money and possibly allocate it, you've got just a lot of distortions out there between counties and townships within counties. And in fact, none of the Marion County townships would get any money because they're all deemed to be underlying Indianapolis and Marion County, a consolidated city. I think another one, North Township, I think overlaps or is underlying almost all municipalities, and so they wouldn't get any money either. And then I used, just because I'm not picking on Allen County, but it just happened to be early on the alphabetical list. Eel River Township, no municipalities. Northwest, I think the northwest corner of Allen County. But still a moderate population size, 3,000 people. They would receive, just based on this formula, this sharing formula, $314,000. But because their budget is only $14,000, $300,000 has to be returned to the U.S. Treasury. Anything over 75% of any individual unit budget has to be returned to the U.S. Treasury. Kansas calculates their impact at $25 million. Ours is going to be north of that. And so we haven't finalized it, but it's multiples of $25 million. And so that's not the basis for the decision. I think our recommendation is that the determination is based on the range of services, but there's also just some distortions, and it just creates other sort of inequities within townships and then by county. Last page, again, so then we're having the IFA is gearing up to administer this program. It's a lot more complicated than was originally presented. You can see here, the local unit of government, city or town, is going to have to upload their terms and conditions document. They have to acknowledge their budget, that the allocation is less than 75% of their budget. They have to do a Civil Rights Act compliance certificate. The IFA will have to direct them to all the guidance of where they can refer. And then they have to request, the request process has to include the option for them to decline the money. What that happens to that is unclear. They could direct it back to the state, say we don't want it, we'll transfer it, upstream it to the state. But those, we're still waiting for the guidance on that. These NEUs are also deemed to be prime recipients. So all these things that we talked about monitoring and reporting, they all have to comply with that. So they're going to have their own periodic reporting. I think it'll be quarterly, maybe. You know, okay. And then this final distribution process will be part of our interim report that's filed in August. Let me stop there.
Senator Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a heavy bomb to end the day with right there. I got a lot of questions, but I'm not going to ask all of them. I'm sure I must assume that I'm going to get a lot of calls from our municipalities about the impact they're going to potentially experience.
Well, our recommendation is that the public information that U.S. Treasury has put out for municipalities, for cities and towns, they will receive that amount. Our determination is to leave it at that level and not include townships. And so your cities and towns have seen that dollar amount.
Right.
And they shouldn't be surprised.
And they started building their budgets, their projects and things like that around that dollar amount.
They might have already,
Yeah.
yes.
So I'm going to go back to the presentation. You have the list of the projects that was funded out of the budget. With the body cam piece, I didn't know that we use the federal funds for the body cams. That was news to me. I mean, I'm not debating that. I just learned that. The question I have about it is for the local match program, for locals to get body cams. Have we already started that?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I think the state police has moved down the path of procuring their own. So they've done an RFP and did test sessions and all of that. But as far as the local program, that has not been started yet.
The reason why I asked, I had a couple of municipalities that asked me right after session were there going to be any state dollars to help with local body cams. So,
well, we're using this funding for the local body cams.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. I appreciate that. I have a really specific question, since it was one of the few agencies that we didn't get to talk to today. With respect to the ARP, and that might not be the right source in the major program areas, there's several dollars here for community-based child abuse prevention, child abuse state grants, and family violence prevention services that I just sort of tagged. And I was wondering if you or maybe Zach had a conversation with the not-for-profit providers in the DCS vendor space, because they had been told 2 years ago that they would be able to have an operating margin similar to the for-profit, and because of the pandemic last year, they were then told that wasn't going to be possible, and then obviously some things have changed, whether it's out of these dollars or in our current budget, which is obviously, this is significant, but our current budget is significantly higher thanks to a good, robust, fiscally conservative state. So I'm just curious if you've had those conversations about also going back and supplying that operating margin for the not-for-profit providers as well as what the for-profit are getting. I don't know who would answer that.
It's something we've talked with DCS about, but I'm not aware that a final decision has been made.
Is that a decision that you need to make, or is that, since this is post-budget session, is that a decision that they are able to make without legislative action or the state budget action?
I don't think legislative action is required in order to make that.
All right, well, in that case, since we did have some very specific line items in DCS, I'm going to suggest, since this was a conversation that happened, I should say began 2 years ago, and it had been, I don't want to use the word promise, but suggested that it would be possible. And again, when we look at these kinds of issues, I go back to, my conversation with FSSA and the home health aides. Again, a space that's difficult to fill, and when we're looking at rate increases, which we did some, but when we're looking at the not-for-profit providers, again, I don't think we necessarily want to incentivize just the for-profit vendors in this space, although it's totally appropriate that they also are in this space. So I would hope that that conversation continues, and I'd like to hear what the results of it are with respect to them. Thank you.
We can do that. I think it's an understatement to say that the DCS budget had a lot of moving parts to it this year. And so working with them a lot.
Well, just to tag then, since my short time, they've had a lot of moving parts without some of us adding moving parts. So I would hope that as big as that budget is, that they could find some dollars for the not-for-profit space for an operating margin.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your comments in this wonderful report. We're going through this for a while now.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, please. And I want to kind of piggyback on Senator Milton. So with the locals, if they're not going to get any support, when are we going to let them know that they don't qualify for those dollars?
So the townships?
Yes, the townships,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
We'll be notifying them, and we're required to put this determination on our website.
Okay, because I mean, like Senator said, they are already counting on that for the most part. I mean,
I think I don't want to be argumentative, but I think
it's not.
I think the cities.
I think this is a good discussion.
Yeah, I think the cities and towns have been counting on it because there were preliminary estimates posted in March, and then there were final numbers put out about a month ago. Townships have not, because not every state, again, we're one of 20 that even have this possibility, and then even one of 8 that's even more remote. And so it hasn't been as public a discussion as far as probably what the municipalities have been, because as I said, the counties, that number's been out there a long time. The metro cities has been out, and also these mid and smaller sized cities have had their numbers out there, or their estimates out there for a while.
Yes, sir. Do you think that we'll be able to spend all the money that we've been talking about for the last year now, the CARES Act?
So the CARES Act, that money's been fully obligated, and
I know. I mean, and that's been our little rub.
Yeah,
it's obligated versus being spent.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's, as I mentioned, health is one where they entered into a lot of purchase orders for testing and contact tracing, and so there's still an unliquidated amount. And so we're monitoring health. I would say Department of Health. What you just heard from Luke Basso. So we set aside $60 million because of House Bill 1004.
Mm-hmm.
So to the extent that there's any residual left in that program, we'll come back and say that money's left. Do we want to repurpose it for or something else? Now, there's plenty of capacity to put it in the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, because the expenses out of that are so significant that the money could be there, and we're still maybe 20% or 25% of where we were prior to the pandemic, with the balance in the UI Trust Fund. But you're exactly right. So that's our focus on the CRF, the CARES Act, is looking at the spend rates and then monitoring that in the next couple of months and say, if you're not going to spend this, then we need to do something else with it and redeploy it for other purposes.
So what is your trigger in regards to not spent dollars? I mean, is it 30 days out?
No,
45 days out from 2021. I mean, because you can sit and do it, and then all of a sudden you wind up with this money and you can't get out the door.
I'm looking at Labor Day to start moving on this.
Okay.
Of saying, look, we got 3 more months to obligate this money. If it's not going to happen, let us know so we can come back and bring these ideas to this body to discuss.
And my last question is, has the application been submitted yet for the rescue plan?
No, as I mentioned, I kind of got hung up technically. We started it this morning here, but we'll be submitting that tomorrow.
You submitting that tomorrow?
Yeah.
Send me a text.
I will.
Thank you.
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one question. It's about the emergency rental assistance dollars.
Yes.
How much is there? How much has been spent? What's left?
I think Jake was before a body yesterday, and I think he said 10 million of it has been spent.
Okay. It's a much bigger chunk.
It's a much bigger chunk.
Okay.
Now, but the thing that I asked Jake to follow up on is the biggest need we are not administering. Because remember, I think we talked about this before, there's 5 counties in the city of Fort Wayne decided to administer their own rent and utility assistance program. And so that's where most of the demand is in Allen, St. Joe, Lake, Elkhart, and Marion County. They're all running their own programs.
Okay. Well, thank you. I didn't watch that conversation yesterday, but I heard 2 little nuggets, and one was, I think it's $370 million, and we've only spent $10 million.
Yep, that's correct.
Marion County has spent a big chunk of the money that went directly to them, is my understanding.
Right.
I don't know about those other big cities, but I guess when we have, I also just pulled this up, there was a new report showing there were 41,000 evictions this past year. And I just think, this money's intended to be a bridge for families. And, a lot of these folks are working again, but they can't catch up. We're going to see more evictions. Like, I want to see these kids staying in their homes. Is there something we can do to help make sure these dollars are spent sooner rather than later or lost, worst case?
Jake, I think, is doubling or enhancing their efforts as far as getting the word out of what they can do. Now, he's looking at the other 86 counties, right? And so, but we're prepared if those 6 counties that are, or 5 counties in the city of Fort Wayne that are administering their own programs exhaust their funds, we're prepared then to redirect, because we can transfer the money to another entity. Okay. So I asked him to monitor that and to check in with that.
Okay.
The other thing that is a little bit different is Jake's program, I think he gave out close to $50 million last year out of the Coronavirus Relief Fund. It doesn't address the entire need, that's obvious. But now what is happening is and it's no excuse, it's just mechanically a little more challenging because they're helping out with utilities. You're dealing with one landlord, but you're dealing with a lot of different utilities, and you're trying to get all the money that applicant is due in one big batch. And so they may have to think about their procedures of breaking them up into individual or at least some sort of separate pieces as far as funding that goes. Okay. But I know operationally that's a little bit of a challenge now that utilities are part of the program.
Is he able to spend some of that money to get the word out?
Yeah.
Or is
yes.
it, okay. And,
yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any further questions? Mr. Jackson.
Chris, I just want to clarify something, if I heard something correctly that you said earlier. On the eligible uses slide, when you talked about government services and kind of things that I think you used the phrase like normally budget for or included in our budget. Is there potential for some of those appropriations made on the other slide? If it doesn't fit into those first 3 buckets and it's not something that we normally budget for, is it DOC stab vests?
Mm-hmm.
We've never appropriated dollars before.
That's right.
Is that potentially something that may not be an eligible use then of ARP dollars if it doesn't fit into the top 3 and we normally don't budget for?
Well, I think in that case at DOC, we budget for, well, we do budget for stab vests, to be honest with you. I mean, we may not have purchased one, but that will fall into the other just equipment category, I think, for DOC.
Not that specific.
Yeah, not that specific, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to go to election of the new chairperson starting July 1st. I place a nomination, Senator Ryan Mishler.
So moved.
Second. Any other nominations for chairperson? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Senator Mishler, July 1st. And you've already talked about a date for the next meeting, is that correct?
I think it's July 27th and 8th?
Yes.
In Muncie. So, Mr. Chair, even though I'm not the chairman yet, can I make a comment?
Go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank you, Chairman Brown, and looking back over the past couple of years, I know you've been through a lot, and I admire your courage and your determination and your will, and you've been a good friend. We love you, Doc.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We have an agenda of this committee before you. Any additions or corrections to the agenda? Do I have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded to accept the agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Same sign. Agenda is adopted. Thank you very much. We have been here quite a while today, heard a lot of information, a lot of important information. I appreciate your time and talent that you spent here. The meeting is adjourned.